In the near future, virtual reality games have become incredibly popular all over the world, which is why many development companies have picked up the trend of creating such games. As a result, the struggle between them became increasingly fierce over time. Big companies are constantly trying to create the highest quality game possible. The main character was one of those who creates such games with artificial intelligence support. The guy was greeted by a hologram of a girl who told him that from now on she would help him. The girl asked to be called Grace. She had big eyes and long golden hair. The guy himself was an ordinary-looking guy with glasses, but nevertheless he was the main developer of a gaming company, and his name was Murphy. Grace was the most advanced artificial intelligence in existence in the entire world. And so Grace and Murphy began creating games together. During the early stages of development, they encountered numerous system errors, bugs, and other difficulties. The game sounded different. They were almost flooded, they were almost killed by lightning, but they did not give up. They went through a hard path to overcome all the difficulties. But soon, with Grace's help, Murphy was able to freely spread his creative wings. Murphy continued to face various difficulties, but Grace was always there and helped the guy in his work. And then the day came when Murphy and Grace achieved the result they had been working towards for so long. Finally, they were able to take a look at the created game world, and on their faces there were sincere smiles that signified happiness. Finally, they created a game that all future users will call truly high quality. This game was recognized as the best massively multiplayer online role-playing game in virtual reality. Murphy managed to create a game with the fantasy world of Wing Online. One day, the guy was working on finalizing the gameplay when Grace suddenly approached him. Murphy asked her what had happened. The girl asked what would happen to her when they finished the game. The young man answered her with a smile that she would become the goddess of this place and asked Grace to take care of this world. But the artificial intelligence didn't seem to be very happy about this news. She asked Murphy if this meant that she and the gentleman would soon say goodbye. The guy was confused by these words. Murphy himself did not expect that this could happen. The young man offered the girl the option that she could contact him, and in the future many other projects would be created. But Grace didn't even listen to the guy anymore. She turned away and said that she was unlikely to help with them, since she would be busy here. Murphy agreed with the girl. He said that she was probably right, because she would have a lot of work if she started to manage the whole game. Grace began thoughtfully that one day, when this world would end, just like now, the girl asked the young man to stay with her. The artificial intelligence turned to the developer and smiled a sincere and kind smile. Murphy's eyes widened in surprise and he remained silent because he didn't know what to answer. For a while after, the developer sat on a chair and talked about something. His appearance was disheveled, and in the end, he summed up that this is how he sees the next major update. It's been a long time since their company launched Ving Online, already 5 years. One of the people in the discussion room entered into a dialogue with Murphy. He was the general manager of the company's commercial department, and his name was Sam. The man stated that they had previously had a stable number of players, but recently their numbers began to decline, as a result of which sales also declined. Sam added that the commercial department was proposing to add an in-game payment system in the Season 6 update, to which Murphy indignantly asked why on earth. The CEO of the commercial department was shocked because he expected Murphy to approve the proposal. But the developer continued to sit with his hands behind his head, and he irritably asked Sam who had allowed him to add this payment system. But the man, slightly confused, replied that it was all for the good of the company. But Murphy echoed the CEO's sentiment and suggested that, if he thought about it, the rest of the management should agree to sell the company's shares at the end of the year. Some of those present sat there, maintaining a calm appearance, while others began to openly become worried as Murphy's words turned out to be true. The developer added with a wicked smile that they thought this decision would at least raise their price a little and told them to go ahead. One of the men present told him to stop discussing such things here. Murphy continued that they should release a server upgrade next, but if they were planning on making a moneymaker, then selling the stock wholesale after the price went up would end up hurting the company even more. The developer concluded that this would all lead to the end of the game, and the balance between small investors would be destroyed. Murphy asked the CEO how many companies had gone bankrupt for the same reason, because of the introduction of an in-game payment system. In conclusion, the developer said that none of this would happen as long as he worked here. The guy said he wouldn't let them cheat in the game he created, but all the men in the room were tensely silent, and the CEO was tormented by the fact that his cunning plan had been discovered so easily. One of those present couldn't stand it, and shouted at Murphy that he was crazy and no one was going to cheat. But the guy told him that if they wanted, they could always fire him. The developer stood up from his chair and headed for the exit. But as he left, he added that they didn't have the courage to do that. Murphy said that if they do decide to fire him, they shouldn't expect him to change his mind. With these words, the guy slammed the door of the discussion room with all his might. The remaining men in the room began to discuss the developer's behavior, calling him names, saying that the meeting had just begun, but immediately ended in an argument. But someone said that nothing could be done. After all, he was the creator of the game. But others said that it was still impossible to behave in this way, and decided to try to persuade him, while the general director himself was immersed in silence. He looked very gloomy. Meanwhile, Murphy walked irritably down the corridor, thinking that the chairman's son looked too suspicious. 3 days passed, and during the day, something strange happened on the main square in the Wing Online game. All the participants of the game stood calmly in the square. Suddenly, a player appeared in the square. Everyone present immediately paid attention to him. Some people simply turned and looked at him, while others were surprised and even panicked. The player began to be enveloped by something small and black, similar to clusters of aura. The player himself extended his hand, and with great effort asked for help from characters with healing abilities. But then the player fell to his knees, and those present began to suspect that the guy was poisoned with something, so one of the players ordered to quickly use purification on him. A girl with a staff emerged from the crowd of players. She decided to help the poisoned player with her energy cleansing, which removes negative statuses from the target. The cleansing was directed at the player and began to affect him, but the black aura of poisoning spread faster. The infection consumed half of most of the boy's body, and half of his body fell to the ground. Everyone present was shocked. They did not understand whether the guy had died or not. A status emerged that the guy had turned to dust, which no one understood. The remaining players were overcome with panic and fear as the black dust began to spread further. After some time, information about this incident reached the game's main office, and the community message board was bursting with messages. John, the head of quality assurance, burst into Murphy's office and told the developer that it looked like the game was in the grip of an incurable epidemic. The guy added that the problem is that if you die because of this virus, your account and character disappear forever. Murphy was calm and said he would go and check it out. The developer added that the problem shouldn't be serious and asked John not to worry because they would restore the accounts once he finished checking, but the head of quality assurance wasn't convinced by the guy's words. That's why John added that it probably won't be easy to fix, as players are going crazy. But Murphy didn't listen to him anymore. He closed the gaming booth and went into the game himself to figure out what was going on in it. A system message appeared on the screen, asking the guy to select the mode he wanted to access. The young man responds to the system that he wants to select developer mode, and a new system message appears on the screen stating that a connection to developer mode is being established. Murphy was instantly transported into the gaming space, and then the guy appeared in the game on the main square. The guy greeted all the players and introduced himself as Game Master Anchovy, at which point the players asked him why he couldn't fix the game. The developer explained that they are currently trying to figure out the cause of the current issue and fix it as quickly as possible. But the players were outraged by how a character could disappear completely and asked Anchovy to make sure they return. The developer issued a message that an urgent review would be carried out as a result, but people began to become even more outraged. Anchovy added messages that user accounts and characters will be returned after verification, and they will all be restored. But player discontent only grew, so the developer simply switched off. Anchovy was transported to another game location, where there was not a single character, so that he could finally be in silence. The guy noticed the black dust flying around. He caught one part of it and realized that it was the epidemic status he had created. The young man's plan was to sow panic in the game and spread the epidemic throughout the entire gaming space. Anchovy wanted to infect all players with this epidemic. But then Murphy realized things were much more serious than he had imagined. Then Grace approached Anchovy and asked why the guy was conducting such a terrible experiment. But Murphy replied with a smile that he was doing it as a tribute to the classic games. The developer spoke about the most famous, massively multiplayer online role-playing game of the 2000s, which suffered a bug that caused an epidemic. Grace was surprised and asked again, and Murphy clarified, adding that the problem had become so serious that even documents related to the game had been published. The young man said that he had not seen such classic game events in other modern games, so he tried to recreate them in this game. Murphy added that the problem is that it has become a fatal bug that cannot be controlled by the in-game system. The young man noted that it was a bit wasteful, but nothing could be done about it. The guy asked Grace to delete all the data from here. The girl responded with approval. And in theory, everything should have been deleted then, but the epidemic remained. Anchovy began to suspect that it was all because of Grace. Murphy asked the artificial intelligence to report the current status. But Grace didn't respond. And suddenly someone's words were heard behind the guy's back, saying that no one would answer him, no matter how much he called. Then CEO Sam appeared next to Murphy. The man announced to Anchovy that from now on he would no longer have access to the game's data. The developer turned around and angrily asked the director what he was talking about. But Sam, with a look of joy on his face, told the guy that he was talking about the fact that he was fired. Murphy's face was filled with shock and confusion at the CEO's sudden announcement. Sam explained that in the news today, a serious incident that happened in this game was due to an employee who rebelled against the company. He deliberately created a plan to destroy it, and the company, having learned about this, decided to fire him. Murphy stood in a stupor and remained silent at these words. The director also added that the guy will force the lawyers to pay for the damages. Anchovy asked Sam if he had come up with it himself, but he told Murphy not to worry, as he would do his best to run the project for the boy. The CEO said the developer was taking on too much of the space to chew. With these words, Anchovy swung his fist at Sam, grabbing him by the collar with his other hand. A couple of centimeters from the CEO's face, something stopped the punch. Grace flew from the sky at super speed, smashing the tiles into huge chunks from the force of her landing. The boy's head was pressed against the stone slabs by the powerful impact. Grace towered over the developer, blocking out the sun. The girl pressed the guy's face tightly to the ground with her foot. The young man did not understand the motive for her sudden action. The CEO approached Anchovy and laughed evilly at this. Sam asked Murphy what he thought and what it was like to be reunited with his former partner in this way. The man added a question about whether the young man had hope for the artificial intelligence's loyalty, but Anchovy tried to protest that he would not leave it at that. The CEO laughed and repeated the guy's words and told him he was crazy. Sam asked the developer what he thought the man had been doing all the time Anchovy had been living in the virtual world. The director told the young man that in the real world he was just a cog in a much larger mechanism, and that in order to survive he needed to adapt. And in the end, Sam suggested that the guy pull himself together and add a sense of reality to his own algorithm. The man told Murphy that even if he hadn't done it, he would have had to find a good lawyer to pay every last penny, and at the end of his monologue, he wished him luck. Anchovy mentally promised that Sam would fail, because Murphy had already decided that he would personally put an end to this world. At that moment, the boy's face was illuminated by the light of the room, and the doors of the gaming booth opened. A security guard gathered at the booth, waiting for the guy to leave. Murphy silently promised that the CEO would soon see the worst possible ending, the bad endings. The news on TV was that at Korea's largest game development company, one of the employees said he didn't like the company's policies. It turned out that he had intentionally added a viral bug to the game. More than 70% of this company's annual sales come from the online game wing. The young man watched the news and mentally talked to Sam, claiming that his plan was flawed. Murphy knew that if the game died, the company itself would be finished. Anchovy decided to change from his home clothes to his play clothes. The guy was talking to the CEO in his mind again, saying that even though he had said that Murphy might be just an insignificant detail in reality, in virtual reality, he was a god. The guy put on the gaming helmet and mentally told Sam that they would see each other soon, because God really was angry. The young man sat down in the gaming chair to enter the game. The guy's plan was to start the end of the world in Wing Online. And so Murphy moved into the game dimension. Someone addressed the guy, calling him Sir. The unidentified boy told Anchovy that he was worried because the boy had not logged on yesterday and asked if Murphy was injured. This guy's name was Oasis. He was the one who replaced Grace when she became the AI of this world, and the guy bought the AI with the company's money. But Oasis was registered to Anchovy's personal account, so it didn't disappear. The guy explained to the AI that he had some unfinished business and immediately asked Oasis if he received notifications every day. The boy answered in the affirmative and said that the organization had sent him a letter, and the artificial intelligence had opened the letter and begun to read it. Oasis was horrified by the news that his master had been fired. He realized that he had not yet come to his senses. The artificial intelligence realized that Murphy could not access the game developer's servers. The boy immediately tried to console his master, telling him that this company was not the only one engaged in development, and there were plenty of places that needed capable people like him. But Murphy brushed off Oasis's offers, telling him he didn't need them. The young man ordered the artificial intelligence to deploy a communication channel. Anchovy explained that the address was disguised as coming from China, and all the files where important information about the system's operation is recorded were forged under different accounts. The guy added that if even one of them is tracked, he must get rid of them all. Oasis replied that he understood, but did not know why it was necessary. Murphy asked the boy to listen more carefully. The guy continued that from now on they will begin to destroy the Wing Online game. With these words, the young man pressed the button to enter the game. Icons appeared on the screen indicating violence, fear, crime, and inappropriate behavior, as well as a system notification stating that the game contains extreme content and advising against playing if you have a weak psyche or body, and so on. Anchovy moved to the game space, where he was met by Oasis, who was dressed in women's clothing. The boy greeted his master, informing him that he was here. Murphy was angry with him because the kid was taking too long to simply create a character, but Oasis explained that it was his first time being an in-game character, which is why the setup took so long. The AI was happy that it finally had a real body, but this angered Anchovy. Oasis was glowing with happiness. He was interested in it, and it excited him. He liked this wonderful feeling. But much to the boy's regret, Murphy did not share his joy and moved on, leaving the rejoicing artificial intelligence behind. Oasis noticed that his master had gotten far ahead of him and was rushing to catch up with his master, begging him to wait so that they could go together. The guys came to some village. It was quite lively there. Due to the disconnection from the organization system, all information related to Wing Online was reset, so everything appears new. So Murphy expected more, and Oasis followed him, beaming with joy. Anchovy didn't understand why his artificial intelligence was so happy. Meanwhile, the boy was dreamily thinking about the adventures with his master. They were like a dream to him. Oasis asked his master what they would do, and immediately suggested that since they were low level, they could hunt squirrels since they were only level 1. The boy continued to reason that they would first take the task from the village elder. But Anchovy interrupted him and asked him to hold the torch and the chicken. Oasis did not understand what his master's actions were. So the artificial intelligence decided to ask Murphy why they needed the torch. But the guy was immediately surprised by the question and replied that the torch was needed, of course, for setting fire. With these words, Anchovy set fire to a haystack standing nearby with the torch. Oasis was horrified by his master's actions, but Murphy gleefully told the boy to repeat after him because they needed a character with a bad reputation. Suddenly, the flames of fire spread throughout all the houses of the village, and a system message appeared stating that the boy had committed a crime for which he had earned 10 points of dishonor. Murphy was surprised that burning a house only gave 10 infamy, but guessed that it might be because they were newcomers to the village. Suddenly, some old man approached the young man and tugged him by the shoulder. Grandfather demanded that Anchovy stop immediately, but Murphy, with a calm face, set fire to the old man's clothes. Grandfather instantly burst into flames and screamed in pain from the burns. It only now dawned on Oasis that this was not an adventure, but a crime. A system message appeared stating that Murphy had killed an NPC and earned 100 infamy points. The guy was delighted and said that he knew the game system would give a lot of points for killing NPCs. The artificial intelligence was indignant and asked what his master was doing, but the young man told him not to worry because he would still be resurrected. And then the old man's body instantly disappeared. But very close by, a new hologram of the old man, a non-player character, began to appear. The grandfather approached the boy and greeted him, introducing himself as the headman of this village. But Murphy immediately brought a torch with fire to him, causing the old man to catch fire. The young man was delighted to discover an easy way to earn infamy points. Meanwhile, Oasis watched his master's actions in horror and prayed that someone would stop him. Suddenly, someone's scream was heard, indicating what was happening to the guys. A crowd of villagers pointed at Murphy, who had set their village on fire, and were heading off to confront him. They were already a couple of meters from Anchovy and were armed. Oasis silently prayed for them to stop his mad master. But Murphy dealt with them in the same way as he did with the village elder. Some of the surviving residents fled in fear from Anchovy's ferocity. Meanwhile, the system was displaying messages one after another about how the guy had killed an NPC and earned 100 points of dishonor. The artificial intelligence realized that its master was serious about his words. Oasis almost cried from the horror of what was happening. After all, Murphy really is going to put an end to the Wing Online game. Suddenly, knights ran up to the boys. They surrounded the criminals and ordered them to stand still as they were under arrest for crimes. All the knights were armed with spears and pointed them at the youths. Oasis stood in fear, not understanding what to do next. But Murphy smiled maliciously. The boys were put into a carriage and driven somewhere. The cart was surrounded by 3 more riders as backup. Meanwhile, in the carriage, the young man looked at his earned points of dishonor. There were 2,140 of them. And the artificial intelligence was upset and couldn't believe that they were going to jail to begin with. Anchovy reassured the boy, telling him that a different place awaited the newcomers. This was an advantage for beginner players, to make it easier to get used to. The guy added that even as a newbie, one can still make money from dishonor, and asked the artificial intelligence what would happen then. Oasis replied that he didn't know, and Murphy explained that in that case, the newcomer village would change into a crime town. Meanwhile, the guys had already been delivered to the location. It was quite spacious, and there were some objects. Murphy settled down to sit on the floor. The criminals were rather roughly pushed into some room. The knight said angrily that this ditch suited them perfectly. Finally, the man spat in the direction of the young men and left. The boys were left in this place, and the knights themselves went about their business. Murphy explained to the boy that if a player accumulates a certain number of infamy points, he will receive a reward. Now the guards did not attack him, but the thugs hunted him. This is the only city where players with a bad reputation can survive. This city is called Underground. Oasis asked if there were any advantages to this city. The young man answered him that instead of them, the boys could take on a hidden task that no one had ever received. It was a villain's quest, available only to the worst players in the world. The AI noticed that this was exactly what his master was talking about and thought it was quite effective if Murphy was targeting it. But Anchovy explained to the boy that it wasn't really, it was just a desperate move. Oasis asked the guy why he was taking the risk then. Murphy explained that he worked hard to develop this task, but no one knows about it or uses it. The guy added that this was extremely sad. Suddenly, someone called the guys. A man in a black cloak appeared in the darkness and commanded the young men to come to him. The boys hesitated in surprise, but the man repeated their request and added that he had good news for them. Murphy explained to the AI that the man was a non-player character who was giving out this quest. The stranger said that he couldn't believe that the young man had already earned so much dishonor. It seemed to him that the guy was not an ordinary villain. The man introduced himself as Dean. He was a dark magician. Dean added that the boys seemed ready to serve the Dark Lord. A hologram screen with a system notification appeared in front of the young men. The message said that the dark mage Dean was trying to make them members of a dark cult. The condition of the task was to earn more than 1,000 points of infamy as a newcomer. Then a class change to a hidden dark mage would occur. Oasis told the gentleman that this was incredible, so that was what he was trying to achieve. But Murphy, with a sly smile, summoned a fiery torch. Anchovy looked questioningly at the boy. Artificial intelligence began to doubt its assumption. At that moment, the young man directed the flame of the torch at the magician Dean. Oasis screamed, asking the guy to stop because the magician could give him a hidden class and clarify whether this was what his master had come for. But Murphy didn't stop. The boy shouted at him about why the guy kept killing the magician Dean. The AI called Anchovy crazy, but the guy explained that he wasn't a pervert to kill an NPC for no reason. Suddenly, Dean's charred body rose from the ground. A thick, dark blue curtain of energy formed over the magician. Oasis was surprised by what he saw and was frightened. And Murphy smiled slyly, because it seemed like everything was going according to his plan. The mage's charred body began to change shape, his limbs becoming covered in armor. A few moments later, a knight covered in this dark blue energy appeared in front of the boys. The dark entity spoke, saying that she couldn't believe that the guy killed Dean. And the knight added that he had long waited for people like Murphy, who were thoroughly imbued with evil. For some reason, the artificial intelligence felt insulted. The entity introduced itself as Terry, the commander of the Dark Knights, and told them to follow it. Terry said that he would find a suitable use for their anger. Then a hologram screen appeared with a system notification that Terry, the commander of the Dark Knights, wanted to create a Dark Lord character for him, and the reward for the task was a class change to a hidden Dark Knight. The young man explained to Oasis that he was looking for the Dark Knight. The artificial intelligence was surprised by the guy's words and seemed to like their content. The boy invited the gentleman to go together, and the boys followed into the dark portal. The location changed to an even darker one. The new room resembled a medieval castle, illuminated by fiery torches. Terry and the boys entered some kind of spiritual circle. The knight welcomed the villains to their new location. But Terry said that before he bestowed the title of Dark Knights on the boys, he asked permission to ask them a few questions. The knight started with Oasis, he called him. Murphy quietly explained to the AI that it should answer Terry's question negatively, since he would have another task. But the boy was indignant. He called the gentleman petty because he wanted to appropriate all the classwork only for himself. But Anchovy explained to the boy that they should advance together. If they were both of the same class, then the balance of the group would be upset. Murphy added to Oasis that he shouldn't worry, as the second quest would be perfect for him. The Dark Knight turned his gaze to the artificial intelligence, leaving it in shock. Terry said that the only and absolute ruler of this world is the Dark Star. Does Oasis agree with this? After hesitating for a second, the boy gives the knight a negative answer. This answer made Terry furious. He shouted at the boy how dare he deny the Dark Star, and announced to Oasis that he had passed. The Dark Knight drove away the artificial intelligence. Terry turned to Murphy and asked him the same question. The question is whether he agrees. To which Murphy responded in agreement. Anchovy added that the only person capable of ruling the world could be a Dark Star. Terry praised the young man for his excellent answer. The Dark Knight asked the guy, as a minion of the Dark Star, whether Murphy would devote himself to the Dark Cult, and the guy agreed. Terry asked the young man if, as a member of the Dark Knights, he would take on the destruction of the followers of light, and Anchovy replied that this is exactly what he wanted. The entity praised the guy for his answer and asked his name. The young man introduced himself as Leo. The NPC asked Anchovy one last question. Will Leo dedicate his body and soul to the Dark Lord? A system message appeared with text that said that if the guy agreed, he would become a Dark Knight, and asked if he agreed, to which the guy happily answered yes. A system message appeared stating that Murphy had become a Dark Knight. Friendship with the Dark Cult had been established. Mana points would be removed. All skills would require health points. All skills are only available to Dark Knights, and they would unlock depending on the character's level. Another message said that the Dark Knight's unique characteristic, diabolism, had been unlocked, and the guy began to reason that if he raised his level of infamy, he would be able to become infinitely stronger. The guy added that his stats would reset to 0 when he was caught by the guards, and the young man would have to level up all his skills again. The beauty of the task lies in these extreme conditions. Oasis was annoyed at the thought that instead of adventures, they had to commit crimes and be on the run. The knight congratulated the young man on joining the Dark Knights and gave him a small gift, a huge sword. But Murphy noted that the chalk was a bit small and thought that he should have installed the original weapon so that he could get a normal one, and the system displayed a new message about the sword appearing. The Dark Knight told the guy to go and spread the name of the Dark Cult throughout the continent. Oasis wanted to leave to receive the assignment, but Murphy stopped him. The guy decided to kill Terry for the sake of the Dark Cult's bright future. The guy raised his sword against the knight. In the game, you earn experience and level up by hunting monsters. Equipment can be obtained by purchasing it with gold obtained from quests. Sometimes you can do some collecting, or you can do some cooking. Form groups with friends, go on adventures, and go on group dungeon crawls. After all, that's the essence of a massively multiplayer online role-playing game. 9 hours of hacking away at an NPC who can't even respond is not normal gaming experience. But if this is the path that the master has chosen, Oasis decided to follow this path. The boy grabbed the torch tighter and ran towards the knight with it to help Murphy. The artificial intelligence jumped up and raised the torch straight into the knight's face. Some of the flames touched Terry's armor. The young man called Oasis a fool because the Dark Knight was immune to fire, and the boy was not a member of the Dark Cult. Anchovy added that if a user who is not part of the cult attacks him, Terry will fight. The artificial intelligence looked from Murphy to the Dark Knight. The entity raised its giant sword upward, intending to strike at the Oasis that was attacking it. It took only half a second for Terry to decapitate the weak boy. The AI's head flew far from the battlefield, and a system message appeared, suggesting that it respawn in the village. But upon respawning, it would receive a 3-day penalty for lack of experience. Oasis called the master, but Murphy explained to him that if he stopped attacking Terry, his health points would be restored. So the young man asked the boy to wait a little. Anchovy added that if he were to respawn in the village, he would receive a fine, so the guy advised him never to do that. The artificial intelligence begged the master to hurry, but after 3 hours, Murphy was still fighting the monster. And finally, the guy deals the Dark Knight a crushing blow, cutting off the entity's head. Anchovy picks up the enemy's helmet and holds it up to show Oasis. The guy boasted that he was able to avenge his artificial intelligence, but the boy asked to resurrect him as soon as possible. A system message appeared stating that the resurrection stone had been used and Murphy had brought Oasis back to life. The artificial intelligence rubbed its neck and said that it didn't want to have its head chopped off again. But Anchovy was only interested in what things had fallen from Terry. The young man walked closer to the body of the slain Dark Knight. A system message appeared about the mask's appearance. The boy noted that the mask was of a unique class, but there were restrictions for mages below level 85, so the young man could not use it. With that, Murphy threw her back into Oasis's arms. Anchovy said that he would sell it later, but for now he asked to keep the mask. The artificial intelligence turned the mask over in its hands, examining it. The boy had a terrible feeling. The second item dropped by the knight turned out to be a basilisk poison potion. Murphy said that this would be useful to him. The third item that dropped was an unknown key. Oasis became curious about what this key was for, and he even beamed with emotion. But the guy replied that he would tell him about its purpose later. But the artificial intelligence became indignant that the guy was playing on his own and not sharing any information, and then they chopped off his head. Oasis wondered why he had come here with the master in the first place. Murphy asked the boy not to be offended and pulled him towards the portal to return to the village. Although the artificial intelligence was offended, it did not resist its master. They entered the portal, which closed behind them. The knight's severed head became a hologram and then disappeared completely. The Dark Knight's body was restored again. He said that everything was as he predicted. Meanwhile, the young men returned to the underground. The oasis was already flourishing, because now it should receive its task. But Murphy noted that there was something else. The artificial intelligence got angry and asked what again. The guy said that as Oasis knows, the online game wing began 5 years ago, and playing as a criminal has many more disadvantages than advantages. This means that the people in the underground are scum. They are easy to defeat just by destroying at least one of their gangs. Murphy continued that the guy they were heading to was considered the king of these psychos. Anchovy concluded that artificial intelligence could call him the king of psychopaths. Oasis didn't know whether to laugh or cry at these words. The boy asked why he wanted to meet at all. The young man replied that to start a big business, you need a lot of things, but what is really important is money. The guys came out onto some crowded street. Suddenly, one man called over to the walking knight, who looked back warily. The stranger told the man that it was clear from his face that he was being pursued by bounty hunters. The masked man told him he had the lowest prices in Korea and guaranteed a 100% safe deal, the cheapest he could find, and offered to pay him on the gold exchange. But another man said that his wife would kill him if he found out, and walked past the masked stranger. The merchant thought to himself that, as expected, marriage was dangerous. That was not why he was lonely, but simply because he did not want to get married yet. But then Murphy and Oasis approached the man, and Anchovy immediately declared that he wanted to meet his boss. The masked man glanced sideways at the newcomers, noting that they looked like scum, and they ignored scum like that. The merchant claimed that he was an ordinary player, but the young man asked the man to tell Alex that Anchovy had done a lot of bad things. The man's expression instantly changed to one of concern, but still the stranger pretended to have no idea what Murphy was talking about and added to the guy that he was mistaken. And the man himself started to run away. Oasis asked the master if they would let him go like that. Murphy calmly told him to wait, and the artificial intelligence asked the guy who Anchovy was. The young man explained that Anchovy was the nickname he used for his Game Master account while working on the game. Oasis was horrified by this and asked Murphy if it was okay to reveal his identity like that. But the young man simply replied that the information here was confidential. Such were the rules of this place. And besides, Alex wouldn't blab. The young man mysteriously added that Alex knew him personally. Meanwhile, 2 unknown individuals crept up on the waiting guys. One unknown person cautiously looked around the corner at his surroundings. Oasis turned to the young man, hinting at the alien presence. But Murphy replied curtly that he knew. Alex sent more of his psychos. One of those unknown people came out to Anchovy and told him that the boss wanted to see him. They put a bag over Murphy's head. He asked them to be more gentle. The artificial intelligence cried out in worry for its master. But the guy told Oasis not to worry. He added that this was for safety. They also put a bag over the boy's head. The bandits took the guys to some mine. Oasis and Murphy, in addition to having bags placed over their heads, also had their hands tied. One of the group of thugs told the boss that he had brought them, and he allowed them to enter. The guys were taken into some room and released. Their masks were removed and their hands were freed. Alex looked Murphy over carefully. Then he simply said that he was not Anchovy. Some events earlier, outside the gaming space, Murphy left the coffee shop and went about his business. The guy was just drinking coffee and was lost in his thoughts when suddenly someone called him. The developer turned around and asked the stranger who he was. The stranger simply introduced himself, calling himself Alex. The stranger said nothing more, but Murphy seemed to recognize him. The guy asked Alex why he decided to find him this way, and added that he could also file a report with the police. Murphy added whether the guy was planning to add stalking to his case. Alex explained that otherwise they would not have met. The guy began to beg Murphy to drop the charges, asking him to show mercy for once. With these words, the man bowed his head. Alex vowed to never do anything illegal in the game again. Murphy only sighed deeply in response. Anchovy explained that he was following company rules and therefore could not help Alex in any way. And at the end he added that even if he could, he wouldn't, which plunged Alex into confusion. The man fell to his knees in front of Murphy in great despair. Alex began to beg the guy with all his might to save him this time. And before Alex's eyes appeared Anchovy himself, who remembered his words from the previous meeting. The boss was confused. It seemed he recognized Anchovy. Alex jumped up abruptly and slammed both hands on the table with all his might. The man ordered all his subordinates to leave his office. Everyone present walked out the door, leaving your guys to talk. Alex returned to his seat inside thoughtfully. But then he stood up again and walked over to the serious Murphy. His gaze changed from stern to friendly and blooming. He said that he did not recognize Anchovy because of his low-level character. In the same cordial tone, Alex asked what had brought the guy to such a wretched place. Murphy asked him not to overdo it and asked if the guy knew he had been fired. Alex asked the young man who he thought he was and added that he was not actually a traitor. Murphy asked him to forget about it and not call him Anchovy or Buddy because he was Leo now. Alex asked who Leo was, but Anchovy explained that it was the account's nickname. The young man thought about Murphy's new nickname and suggested that it was a hint at something like the final boss. Alex asked if he was right, but Anchovy's mouth dropped open in shock. Oasis assumed that his master wanted to become the final boss of this world. Murphy changed the subject, asking to get closer to the point. Anchovy told Alex that he would give him important information, but in return he asked him to borrow some gold. The guy began to agree, and Murphy began to tell him about things that interested him. Anchovy said that they would soon add a stash item that would increase the chances of enhancement, and suggested that Alex buy an enhancement stone and then sell it after some time. Murphy noted that the young man would still make money. But he added that, however, in a month, when the 6th season is downloaded, the level limits will be raised and new equipment will be added. And the enhancement stones on the market will be sold out when they add a new item. The young man revealed that there would be a shortage of power-up stones throughout the 6th season, and Alex would be able to relax. The guy replied that it wouldn't be difficult for him to lend Anchovy some money, but what would happen to the game? Alex asked if it would be okay if they released something like this. Murphy told his friend that this was just the beginning. The guy continued that in the future, there will be many more items that will affect the balance of the game. Sam will do anything for profit. A hologram appeared in front of the young man with a message that contained a request for a deal with Alex. The guy said that there was 1 million gold here. Just as Anchovy asked, he shared important information, so the young man would not ask why he needed so much. Murphy thanked his friend for his help and promised to repay the debt soon. Alex finally asked Anchovy if he would make money from the power-up stones, but the young man replied that he wasn't there for the money. The guy told Oasis that they were leaving. As they were leaving, the guy said that Murphy had a rather pleasant face now, but Anchovy didn't understand him. The young man turned around and asked what his words meant. Alex explained that the faces of people like them are the true villains. The guy added that the face of villains who will achieve their goal at any cost. Murphy thought about the words of his acquaintance. What it could mean. The face of a true villain. Anchovy tried to remember where he might have heard this before, and the artificial intelligence clarified that it turned out that Murphy had dropped the charges after all, because Alex had been so polite to him, calling him his friend. The young man explained that the trial was simply a show, a performance to warn offenders. Even if Alex had not come to him in person, the case would have been closed anyway. Oasis asked his master if he was tired, since he had been playing for 15 hours already. Anchovy admitted that he was a little tired and asked to open the transactions window first. The guy had 1 million gold in his account, and he gave it all to Oasis. Murphy told the AI to open several banks and warehouses on them, and buy all the iron ore priced at less than 5 gold on the currency market. I asked Oasis if it was definitely time to buy it there, but the guy said he would explain later, as he was too tired right now. Anchovy also threw something after him so that the boy could get to the 10th level without him, but the artificial intelligence immediately asked what was going on with his work. Disappearing from the game space, Murphy replied that the job could be changed at the 10th level. The guy said that they had worked hard and disappeared with these words. Oasis realized that from this moment on he was on his own and could finally truly enjoy the game. The guy jumped for joy. A young man walked into one of the stores and announced that he was buying all the iron ore worth 5 gold pieces. A system notification appeared about the completion of the iron ore purchase. Artificial intelligence has gone hunting bats. And then the boy went hunting for spiders. A system notification hologram appeared, informing him that his inventory was full and asking him to try again when he had more space. Oasis realized he had collected too many items and began to ponder what to do with them next. The artificial intelligence decided to create web fabric, and the system notified about the increase in the crafting skill level. Oasis realized how much fun this was. The boy decided to try cooking, and the system notified him that his cooking skill had increased. The boy began to wonder why he had nothing to do. But suddenly Oasis found something that he hadn't done yet. It was fishing. The system sent messages about the increase in the fishing skill level. The artificial intelligence has been upgraded so much through crafting that it has now reached level 12. A day passed and Mr. Oasis had not yet returned. The boy sat and fished, waiting for Murphy. Suddenly, the artificial intelligence was noticed by 2 enemies. They recognized him and decided that he was still new to the underground and had not changed jobs. The enemies joyfully went to the Oasis to deal with it, and so they took out their weapons and jumped over the boy to attack him from behind. One of the enemies greeted him and swung. The artificial intelligence heard a noise from behind and turned around. Meanwhile, Murphy was asleep in his room, resting after a long game. The phone rang, displaying a multitude of missed messages and calls. Anchovy realized that he couldn't escape for now, and thought that he needed to come up with an alibi. Sometime later, at a restaurant in the evening, head of graphic design at Wing Online, Sarah, asked if he was planning on going on the trip. Anchovy agreed and added that he had worked hard for 15 years and therefore wanted to go somewhere far away. Head of quality John supported his friend's idea. Since the club's high school days, Murphy has been developing Wing Online with these guys. Leo's unusual playing style would become a big problem for the guy. They might suspect him, so the young man believed that the trip was the perfect alibi. The girl sitting opposite asked the guy where he was going. But Murphy, with an unperturbed look, replied that he had always wanted to visit India or South America, and he also wanted to go to Bali. Sarah looked at the young man with distrust because the girl had good intuition. John, while gobbling up his food, replied that his friend should take advantage of the opportunity and rest, since he had been working hard. But Sarah didn't give up on her question so easily. The girl asked Anchovy what he would do after he returned. Murphy replied that he hadn't thought about it yet. John added that he envied the young man because he also wanted to go on vacation and wondered when the last time he got enough sleep was. Anchovy jokingly suggested to his friend that he quit. John choked on his food. He didn't know if it was worth it. The girl drank another glass and thoughtfully said that maybe she should leave too, since she had wanted to for a long time. Sarah suggested that 2 friends try to start over. The boys looked at her carefully. The girl added that they could just form one small group, just like in high school, and create a game. John agreed with his friend without hesitation, adding that if she opened a company, he would join. The 2 friends looked at Anchovy, waiting for his answer. But the guy called them fools and said that they were already completely drunk. The girl said she was serious, and Murphy reminded her that she was responsible for her mother's hospital bills and her brother's education. Sarah fell silent. She understood that the young man was right. Anchovy turned to John. He said that his friend had a pregnant wife. How could he talk such nonsense? The friends tried to object, but the young man called them idiots and asked them to forget about it. Murphy simply poured more drinks for his friends. The young man thought that one day the 3 of them would create a small company, and Anchovy would be happy to work on games in it. But now it was impossible. After all, the guy first has to take revenge on the company for ruining their game. Anchovy was confident that he could handle it as a villain on his own. But a little later, the young man thought about how his artificial intelligence oasis would live there. Meanwhile, the boy was fighting with all his might against his enemies. One of the villains noticed something, but the second one continued to deliver powerful blows to the boy. One of these blows shattered the concrete surface of the street, and Oasis barely dodged the blow. But the artificial intelligence asked the guys what was going on and why they suddenly started attacking. But the enemies didn't understand who this boy was, because he repelled their attacks very well. The men didn't understand how a beginner player could block them. The enemies agreed that this was impossible, most likely a mistake, and decided to try attacking Oasis again. Two enemies rushed at full speed at the boy, who just a couple of minutes ago was simply fishing. The artificial intelligence opened its eyes, expressing excitement. Oasis took a stance and prepared to fight the guys, a dagger in his hand. And so the boy parried the enemy's blow, and the system displayed a message that it was a successful block. The second enemy immediately attacked, but the boy parried his attack as well, and the system again displayed a message that the block was successful. Oasis asked the enemies why they continued to attack. One of the men asked the other whether this was a technical error in the game or not. The second replied that it did not look like an error. The enemy told another that blocking only reduces incoming damage. But his comrade replied that not with this weapon. The man added that the only weapon in Wing Online with a 100% block rate can be purchased in the beginner's village. This weapon is called the beginner's dagger. One of the enemies noted that this was unfair, but the second explained that no one uses this weapon because the damage is too low. The man was surprised that Oasis was able to repel the attacks with just his skill level in the game. The second of the bandits suggested that there were two options. Either the boy was a genius in one-on-one combat, or he was using a code of advantages. But the first one noted that he had never met heroes who used advantage codes in this game. But the second of the enemies said that that explained everything. The man suggested that his friend check for himself whether he was using special advantage codes or not. And with these words, the man takes out a crossbow and shoots an arrow at the artificial intelligence. The enemy shouted at the boy to try to repel it. The bandit launches a rain of arrows towards the Oasis, but the boy deflected all the arrows with his dagger. The men agreed that Oasis uses special advantage codes. Suddenly, one of the arrows pierced the boy's dagger, shattering the weapon into small pieces. The system displayed a message stating that the dagger's durability had run out and the weapon was broken. The artificial intelligence looked at the weapon fragment with bewilderment, and at that very moment, one of the arrows flew into its face, and a system message appeared stating that the boy had died. Enemies were still wondering whether Oasis had used special advantage codes or not. The enemies found this creepy and decided to write to the game master about it. Suddenly, a question was heard from behind the bandits, asking why they were attacking one person at a time. The men simultaneously turned around to look. Murphy said his head was going to explode, and thought that if he drank that much again, he would go berserk. Both enemies asked Anchovy who he was. The young man answered them that he was a friend of that boy and looked at the lying body of Oasis. Artificial intelligence called its master. Anchovy told the enemies that if they wanted to kill someone, they would be prepared for their own death. The young man took out his sword and angrily asked if they knew about it. The guy pointed a knife at his enemies, ready to attack them at any moment. Both enemies were wary, their faces expressing tension. Murphy jumped up and ran as fast as he could towards the enemy. At one moment, Anchovy was already behind the archer. The young man dealt a blow to the villain, but the man realized a second later that Murphy wasn't that strong. His attack had no effect. He burst out laughing and called his opponent incompetent. Anchovy realized that the damage hadn't been dealt due to the difference in levels. Meanwhile, the second of the villains rose into the air above him, and the guy wondered if it was time for the enemy to prepare for death. But the man asked him in response whether he was ready and brought down a crushing blow on the young man. But he was able to dodge, and the enemy shattered the stone street with his blow. The young man returned to a stable position to prepare to continue the fight with the enemy. Murphy pulled out the basilisk's poison potion, though he felt bad about using it on such a relatively unthreatening enemy. But Anchovy realized that in this case he had no choice. With these words, the guy throws a bottle of poisonous basilisk potion straight at the enemy. The male archer does not understand what it is, but correctly suspects that it is a poisonous potion. The enemy shouts to his friend that they need to get out of the poisonous cloud. The enemies ran as fast as they could away from the cloud of poisonous substance. But at that moment, Murphy throws a second container of poison at the men. The bandits decide to split up. Anchovy, meanwhile, was already on a hill directly above the villains. He told them not to worry, because this poison had the properties of most gases. The guy added that if you set it on fire, it will disappear. And with these words, Murphy throws a torch with a flame of fire on the enemies. The first of the villains ordered his friend to run. A moment later, a colossal explosion occurred, and the flames spread over a large area. The second man drank the healing potion and commanded the first to do the same. But the archer said that he was stunned and unable to take any action. The first villain thought that he was stunned because he lost 70% of his health points in 5 seconds. And if he was attacked before the effect ended, he would be finished. Murphy emerged from the fire and told the men, as expected of high-level players, that it looked like they were still alive. Anchovy's gaze expressed malicious glee towards the bandits. The archer asked his comrade to buy him time until the stun wore off. The second villain answered him in agreement and added that he should not worry. The man used the defensive stance ability, which essentially causes the hero to enter an invulnerable state, losing the ability to attack, and all attacks against members of his own party are redirected to the hero who activated the ability while his defense increases. Murphy realized he would have to use the sword with the dark aura. Anchovy takes out a huge magic sword and rushes to attack the enemy. But the man noted that with the guy's current strength, this technique wouldn't work. The young man does not listen to the enemy's words and flies into the air above the enemy to strike. At the same moment, Murphy brings down a sword blow on the villain, and he is perplexed by the source of such damage. Anchovy notes that this blow is already different from the previous ones, but the new skill consumes a percentage of health points per second, which is quite risky, but this is the only way the guy can compensate for the difference in levels. The young man understands that he needs to finish quickly and delivers a series of sword strikes to the enemy. The archer commanded his comrade to cancel his defensive stance and simply attack. The man agrees and cancels his activated ability. The enemy raised his hands in a blow and announced to Murphy that his bluff was over. These words tensed Anchovy, who looked at the villain with a displeased look. The second enemy deals a cutting blow to his enemy. A flash of light obscured everything around, blocking the view of the battlefield. But then the smoke cleared, and the enemy's treacherous grin was replaced by an expression of shock on his face. Murphy had in his hands the very same novice dagger that had managed to completely repel the enemy's devastating attack. The archer explained that the boy had managed to change his weapon. But the second villain noted that it was impossible to change weapons during a fight. The first enemy added that theoretically changing weapons during combat was possible, but this was the first time he had experienced this. The short time frame is crucial here, as the slightest mistake and the hero will be penalized for the weapon dropped from his hands. Since every second affects the outcome of a one-on-one fight, this technique is considered forgotten. Both enemies wondered how this guy used it and who he was anyway. The moment the enemies saw the young man approaching them, they decided to retreat. After all, the villains realized that they were not dealing with a newcomer, but a monster. But Murphy says he's much worse than a monster. Anchovy told the men that he was an endangered species. And with that, the boy swung his dark blade at the enemies. Both villains watched the young man closely and decide what to do. But at that moment, the guy started running towards them as fast as he could. The second one prepared to fight Murphy and took a pose. One moment, Anchovy rushed past the villain, and he realized that the young man was not aiming at him. The archer told his comrade not to worry about him, as the stun had already worn off. The guy passed through the enemy in an instant, and he didn't even understand what happened. Murphy cut his opponent in half, sending his pieces flying everywhere. Before disappearing, the archer realizes that it is time for him to take a break. But Anchovy set off in pursuit of the second villain. The enemy took refuge in one of the underground's quarters, where he temporarily decided to catch his breath and comprehend what had happened. The man quickly decides to leave the game before Murphy catches up with him. A system message appeared on the screen stating that the game would exit in 5 seconds. The enemy began to wait for these 5 seconds to expire. 2 seconds before the game ends, Murphy catches up with the enemy and raises his sword over the enemy. And at the last second before leaving the game, the guy cuts the second enemy into 2 pieces. Meanwhile, the artificial intelligence was lying in the water with an arrow in its head, and it seemed the master had forgotten about it. A system notification hologram appeared that Murphy had used the resurrection stone. Oasis noted that this work was too extreme and he couldn't do it. But Anchovy apologized to the boy and touched his head with his hand. The guy asked if he was late and looked the artificial intelligence straight in the eyes. The Oasis was in some confusion after this. But when the ice thawed, the boy looked rosy and said he was starting to get used to being resurrected all the time. Suddenly, a hologram of a system notification screen appeared, stating that player Leo had 4,380 infamy points. Murphy was outraged by the number of points, expecting them to be much higher, and with annoyance in his voice said that those guys were small fry, although they seemed strong to him. Anchovy explained that when killing other players, the hero receives half of their dishonor, and the men only had about 2,000 points. A system message appeared about increasing the level of devilry by 1 level, to which the guy reacted with annoyance. The boy told Oasis that his incredible reaction could lead to suspicions of using advantage codes, so he advised the artificial intelligence to tone down its combat skills. The boy wondered how to reduce it on purpose. Murphy advised the boy to be more humane. Anchovy told the artificial intelligence to follow him quickly because it was time for his work. The boys came to the doors of the temple. Oasis was puzzled as to why they came here. Murphy took the boy by the shoulders and crouched in front of him. The boy explained that all of his Dark Knight skills consumed health points, so he had to keep an eye on his health bar. Anchovy continued that drinking healing potions or receiving healing, and so the young man asked Oasis to become a priest. The guy added that this was to restore his health points. Artificial intelligence explained his words on how to become his walking healer. But the young man understands that he has been exposed. He picks up Oasis, throws him over his shoulder and says that it is time to change his clothes. But the boy was indignant and said he also wanted to get a hidden job, to which the guy briefly replied that he had already said that everything would happen. After some time, Oasis changed his clothes and came out to the master. The young man turned to him. The AI notified Murphy that he was finished. A system message appeared, which listed Oasis's new job as a priest, his level, the level of his items, strength, agility, intelligence, endurance, magicka. The guy laughed and said that he knew it suited artificial intelligence, and added that the guy looked just like a priest. Anchovy began to explain that the priests were noble people, because if they ran away from a group hike, people would line up to help. But Oasis said that he understood everything and asked the young man to stop. Murphy told the boy that now that he had a job to do as well, he suggested they move on to the next target, and the boy asked if his master was planning on killing NPCs again. But the young man said that the goal was different, and it was that the guys had to reach level 90 in 1 month. In other words, the young men would level up to the end. Artificial intelligence was surprised at how this could be done in 1 month. Oasis understood that it usually takes more than 6 months to fully level up. Murphy explained to the boy that the most extensive update would be released in a month. The guy added that this update will open a new world, add new items, and raise the maximum level to 100. The young man explained that he and Oasis would pass first, and when the update came out, they would completely monopolize the new world. Anchovy announced this with great enthusiasm on his face. The boys reached one place. The system displayed a message saying that this was a snake lair. Oasis asked his master about whether the 50th level dungeons were too difficult for them. The young man asked the boy not to worry because everything was planned. But Murphy didn't have time to finish the sentence when he heard terrible sounds right in front of him. Anchovy turned towards the incoming sound and saw a giant snake. At that very moment, the guy pushed his artificial intelligence aside. The snake monster struck the spot where the boy had stood a second ago. The guy shouted at the monster, which almost scared him. The young man grabbed his blade in his hand and activated the dark aura. Anchovy commanded his AI to leave the healing to him. The young man's gaze was directed forward, straight at the giant, level 50, snake monster with incredible strength. And the guy himself rushed into battle with a huge and powerful enemy, who was already ready to inflict new blows on the small heroes. The boy responded to this with consent and gripped his priest's staff tighter. Oasis knew his master was counting on him now, so he swore to himself that he would protect him. Anchovy rushed towards the monster, raising his sword above himself and preparing to strike with all his might. Several swings achieved their goal, cutting the monster's scales in several places, but not killing it. The snake sensed this, its bloodshot eyes continuing to follow the dark swordsman's actions. He hissed in anger and threw his body away, after which he slashed at the swordsman with his tail. The blow caught the guy, but he didn't have time to parry it, which is why the snake literally sent him flying. Even though they were in the game, Anchovy felt that blow, which even took his breath away. His body flew into the column, causing it to crack and begin to crumble under the impact. What he saw greatly frightened Oasis. He was very worried about his master, so he rushed to help him. The young priest concentrated and used the healing touch skill on his older comrade. The swordsman's wounds began to heal, his health bar quickly filled up, and his strength returned to him. He praised the AI, after which he said that he could completely trust his personal healer and move on. The swordsman, with renewed vigor, rushed towards the snake again, preparing his sword to continue the fight. The priest, although not as quickly, followed the guy, saying that he would cover his back. He cast the healing touch spell on the swordsman again, causing his comrade to become even more active and cheerful. Anchovy was already close to the snake, so he raised his sword behind him to deliver another chopping blow. The blow landed directly on the giant serpent's hood, but did not cause any significant damage. Oasis continued to use the healing touch spell incessantly, but the swordsman's health was already at its limit, so the spell had no effect, as the warrior himself noticed. He barked at the AI for using the spell so thoughtlessly, demanding that it calm down or the snake would notice him. His words were the pure truth, because before he had time to do anything, the creature was already rushing towards the defenseless healer. The swordsman had no time to react. All he could do was watch helplessly as it happened. The boy continued to use spells, but noticed the danger flying towards him at full speed too late. The snake, with its mouth wide open, rushed at him, not giving the poor priest a chance to dodge or counterattack. Another moment, and the snake is already lying flat with its mouth closed in the place where the oasis had just been. The creature swallowed the poor boy, which left Anchovy very discouraged and unsure what to do next. With his health-draining skills, he couldn't last long alone, so his time reserve was just over a minute. The snake had already turned towards him, hissing angrily and preparing for another attack. The swordsman had to defeat the monster in the remaining time. Otherwise, he would die, which would mean the loss of all his accumulated points. He couldn't afford such a loss if he wanted to achieve his desire and destroy this game, so he rushed into the attack without thinking. The snake noticed the movement, so it also rushed at the guy. Both of them were aimed only at destroying each other. The snake lunged, but Anchovy was able to dodge it and was about to strike back. Unfortunately for him, he lacked the space and momentum to hit the monster properly, which infuriated him, since he was the one who came up with them. So who else but him should know how they attack and how to kill them? The snake wasted no time, as it was already preparing to strike the guy with its tail. He recognized the attack in this movement, so all that was left was to time it correctly and dodge. The anchovy deftly jumped away at the right moment, and instead of being pinned to the ground, its tail struck the ground, breaking the stone floor. He landed safely on his feet and was already preparing for the kite's next movement, trying to remain calm. The snake surrounded him, intending to grab him with its body and crush the swordsman under the weight of its body. Anticipating the attack, the guy jumped at the right moment, causing the attack to miss its target. He landed right in front of the snake, which continued to look at its elusive prey without a single emotion. The serpent charged again, opening its mouth to pierce Anchovy with its poisonous fangs. The swordsman again anticipated the snake's strike, so he jumped up and avoided the blow, causing the snake to simply crash into the rock behind him. He could not drag out this fight any longer, so it was now that he grabbed the sword with both hands, preparing to deliver one decisive blow. Continuing to fall straight toward the serpent, he charged his thorn blade to pierce the creature's skull and end this fight. He fell with his whole body on the snake, forcing it to hit its head on the ground. The sword entered the monster's head up to the hilt, causing serious damage. Unfortunately for Anchovy, these injuries were not enough to kill the snake, so the monster hissed and began to thrash, trying to throw the offender off its head. The guy cursed and held on tightly to the sword. He understood that he couldn't cope here alone. The sword slipped from the snake's skull, causing the swordsman to fall off the monster's smooth head, unable to grab onto anything. As he fell, he thought that he was just one blow short of victory, but his strength was already leaving him. As he fell down, he was already in despair and decided that this was a failure and that he would have to start all over again. But before his body touched the ground, his strength began to return to him, and his health bar quickly filled up. Feeling a surge of strength, he regrouped and landed safely on the cave floor. His unexpected recovery could only mean one thing. Oasis was still alive and helping him as best he could. Somewhere inside the snake, the poor AI was casting its spells, thus continuing to assist its master. With renewed strength, the boy promised himself that he would definitely save his comrade, so he rushed towards the monster. He ran towards it and prepared to finish off the monster, shouting along the way that he would free his comrade from the snake's stomach. The snake, noticing the movement, also rushed towards him, baring its two poisonous fangs, preparing to attack with them again. But luck was not on the monster's side, as one slashing blow from the swordsman was enough to cut the snake in two, ending the fight. Having made sure that the monster was dead, he began to carefully open its stomach, looking for his assistant inside. Among the slimy entrails, he still managed to find poor Oasis, quietly awaiting rescue. Feeling the fresher air, he carefully opened his eyes, checking what was happening around him. Seeing that the AI was alive, Anchovy exhaled, because even though they were in the game, at that moment he was very worried about his comrade. Realizing that the threat had passed, the young priest opened both eyes and turned to his master. He smiled heavily and said that, as he had promised, he would definitely cover the swordsman's back. After some time, still in the same cave, the squad caught their breath from the heavy fighting and came to their senses. When checking the statistics, they were very surprised that they were able to increase their level by as much as 5 points with just one monster. The guy noted that the reason for such growth was the huge difference in levels between them and the monster. Moreover, although they didn't come here for a reward, but only to increase their level, they still managed to get something. From the snake's corpse, they were able to collect gold coins, meat, and scales, which in itself did not have any serious benefit. He thought that next time they should go to the dungeons, where they could get better items than these. After a while, he was already fiddling around near the wall, looking for something on it, while Oasis just silently watched his master. Curiosity forced the AI to ask what they were doing now, because he did not understand at all what was happening. The guy continued to move his hand along the wall, explaining that instead of snakes, there were originally supposed to be lizard people here. He moved his hand along the wall and continued to talk about how human-like monsters made players uncomfortable. So they designed monsters and people as people, without any intermediate hybrids. He stopped because something fell under his hand and forced him to take a closer look. Continuing his explanation and wiping dust from the wall, he explained that lizard people often use traps, so there should have been some in this dungeon too. Having wiped the dust off the wall, he was finally able to get a good look at the lever on it, which looked like an ordinary protruding stone. He applied just the right amount of force and turned the lever slightly, causing a slight shaking to begin under their feet. Where they were moving, the floor split into 2 hatch doors and collapsed downwards, revealing to their view the crooked but sharp spikes at the bottom of the pit. The boy priest was surprised by what he saw, but Anchovy himself did not react to it in any way. Oasis noted that the fall would clearly be fatal, to which his master confirmed his guess, adding that this also applies to monsters. Having turned the lever back, he cheerfully informed the boy that it was time for him to move out, but the latter, not understanding his master, asked where he needed to go. The floor panels immediately slid open, hiding the abyss from their sight once again, and the swordsman explained to the priest that it was time for him to go forward into the dungeon and lure as many monsters as possible behind him. The boy was taken aback and asked his master again whether he should be the one doing this, since he was the one providing support in the battle. Anchovy sighed heavily and, with obvious sarcasm, asked the poor AI whether he had expected that the swordsman would go. Again in a cheerful tone, he told his assistant that he should bring him only 10 monsters, no more. Oasis's face darkened at what he said. He definitely didn't want to do something like that, but he couldn't refuse his master either. After a few minutes of anxiety and worry, he was already wandering through the caves in search of other monsters. A heavy rustling sound was heard behind him. Something had clearly noticed him and was already looking for him. The boy wasn't imagining things. The snake was already right in front of the poor priest, trying to get a better look at its potential prey. Oasis, very nervous, turned to his master, tearfully pleading with his face not to send him on this mission. Anchovy just smiled and indicated with his fingers that they needed 10 of those. Tears of fear appeared in the priest's eyes. He understood that he would either complete this task or die endlessly trying. After some time, one of the snakes hissed menacingly at its prey, which it still could not catch up with. AI ran as fast as he could, fighting for his life to the last and not letting the snake swallow him alive again. A whole pack of snakes was already chasing the poor boy, not lagging a meter behind their prey. Anchovy watched the commotion inside the caves from the sidelines, quietly waiting for his assistant to return. For a moment, everything was quiet. The swordsman peered into the darkness of the caves and was somehow able to make out his comrade running towards him. Poor Oasis was running from a whole pack of monsters, begging his master to help him. The pack of snakes continued to chase him. They did not want to lose their prey. The warrior encouraged the boy, repeating that he should hurry since he had almost reached a safe place. The poor priest continued to run and shouted through his tears that he was tired of constantly dying. The boy was only a few meters from safety. His owner was ready to activate the trap right under the snakes. At that very moment, he realized that in just a little while the snakes would reach them, so he could not wait any longer. He turned the lever of the hidden mechanism, causing the ground to shake slightly and the lever itself to make a small click. Oasis was a little late because the trap doors opened right under his feet and he fell down. The ground also collapsed under the giant carcasses of the snakes, causing them to fall down at an even greater speed. They reached the bottom in an instant, where they ran into stakes that littered the entire bottom of the trap. The priest extended his thin hand towards Anchovy, hoping that he would catch him in time. The warrior did not betray the hopes of his subordinate and rushed forward to catch the falling boy. Their hands touched, but he was unable to grab his comrade. Anchovy didn't have time to understand what had happened, because he was sure that his plan was perfect. The Oasis, screaming, only fell down, unable to escape yet another death. He fell and stretched out his hand to his master. A grimace was visible on his face, from which one could understand how helpless the boy felt. The warrior still reached his hand down, trying to catch his priest, but it was already pointless. With a loud sound, the boy fell to the bottom of the pit, where another death overtook him. 2 hours later, they continued doing the same thing, but the AI was no longer as scared as the first time. A new crowd of snakes chased after him, wanting to swallow him whole, but the priest successfully closed the distance. Without a drop of fear, he reported to his master on the run that the last 8 snakes were chasing him. The warrior heard his subordinate, after which he activated the trap again to finish off these monsters as well. This time before the trap opened, Oasis jumped as high as he could, and the snakes flew down to meet the stakes at the bottom of the trap. The boy flew safely to a safe area and landed deftly on his feet without receiving any harm. In 2 hours, he managed to die 3 times, but this was enough to automatically carry out all actions with crushing success. Thanks to these 8 snakes, the boy was able to reach level 30, which he was very happy about. Anchovy also appreciated this, saying that the boy was doing well. He also asked the priest if he was ready to change his class, to which he immediately responded with his consent. However, the warrior suddenly changed his mind, telling his comrade that they still needed to deal with the dungeon boss before leaving. Arriving at the gate to the boss room, Anchovy realized that the leveling up had paid off, but the monster inside was still much stronger than him. He hastened to calm Oasis from his hasty alarm because he wanted to use traps against the boss again. The priest didn't feel much better after hearing this, so he asked if he needed to be bait again, to which Anchovy replied in the negative, and said that the priest only needed to open the door and go a short distance into the room, and the warrior outside would activate the trap. What was said did not calm the boy down in any way. Rather, the feeling of anxiety inside him only grew stronger. As Anchovy had asked, the priest opened the door to the boss's room and then began to slowly move inside. The air in the room was stale, and a light greenish fog hung near the floor. The room itself was unlit, so the boy was unable to move quickly. Through this darkness, he was unable to see anything at all. It seemed that if he went a little further, the darkness would swallow him up too. Suddenly, a fire lit up in the darkness by itself, and light gradually began to illuminate the room. The torches continued to light up, illuminating the room more and more, revealing to the boy a dark something in the center of the room. This something stood quietly and watched the priest, without taking its cold gaze off for a moment. Oasis was stunned. He immediately realized what kind of creature appeared before him, and it was a giant basilisk snake. Somewhere behind the door, Anchovy stuck his head out and told his comrade that he would be petrified for a while, but then immediately tried to cheer the boy up, saying that he would be fine. The boy turned around and did not believe what he heard at all. Fear completely paralyzed him, and the lack of understanding caused even more anxiety. The basilisk woke up from its trance, its pupils filled with a dim red light, and it began to move slowly. His eyes grew brighter and brighter. A mysterious, magical power first appeared around him and then fell upon the poor priest. The skin on Oasis's body began to harden, and movement became increasingly difficult until he lost the ability to move altogether. Anchovy tried to encourage his companion by telling him that he would lure the snake into a trap before it attacked the priest. After his words, the basilisk rushed towards them, hissing angrily and baring its fangs. The boy was in his way, but he could not jump away or run away. His body did not obey, and he himself turned into an almost completely stone statue. Panic gripped him. The only thing he could do was scream in fear. The warrior silently watched and waited until the snake was in the right place to activate the trap in time. When the snake reached the right place, it pressed the slab into the wall. It was pressed with difficulty, after which a click was heard. Giant stakes fell from the ceiling onto the snake, leaving him no chance to dodge or crawl away. The stakes pierced the basilisk's head, piercing the creature's thick skin and causing incredible damage. The monster stopped and rose, hissing loudly from the pain that these stone stakes were causing it. The next moment, the monster's strength left it, and it collapsed right in front of the petrified boy, after which it breathed its last. Oasis looked straight at the carcass of the dead snake that lay right in front of him. He couldn't believe that this time death wouldn't overtake him again. The boy's owner himself entered the hall, saying that he had thought everything through and that the priest had nothing to fear in this situation. After these words, the stone spike closest to the boy, sticking out of the snake's head, swayed and began to fall in his direction. The only thing the boy managed to do when he saw the falling stone was to be surprised. The stone instantly cut poor Oasis in half, leaving no chance for survival and scattering his petrified remains around. Anchovy was taken aback by what he saw, and then was also very surprised, standing in front of the corpse of his subordinate. His comrade lay before him, broken into many pieces and with no way to simply heal himself. The guy looked at the corpse of the AI, and the only thought in his head was that now he understood the reasons why artificial intelligence revolts in films. After some time, they returned to the city, where Oasis was already alive and well. He sat there with a sullen face, glaring angrily at his owner, as the latter tried to explain to him that the problem was with the game's realistic physics. Realizing that this conversation was going nowhere, Anchovy changed the subject and reminded his comrade that it was time for them to change their class. The boy only nodded in agreement, after which he turned away. It was obvious that he was very offended. There was definitely no prospect of a full-fledged conversation, so the warrior only said that he was going to the temple. Oasis nodded again, his face twisted in a look of obvious displeasure and anger at the warrior. Having finished his not very friendly conversation, the warrior opened a dark portal right in front of him. He walked straight into it, leaving the offended boy behind. Now he had no time to calm and encourage the boy. Behind the portal, the Dark Knight Terry was already waiting for him. He was very happy to see the new disciple of the Dark God again. He stood and praised Anchovy, noting how quickly he developed, but the warrior himself would like to sort out the class change as soon as possible. The boy rechecked his friendship with the knight. He treated him well, which caused the thought to destroy the knight again to pop into his head. Having finished praising him, the knight got down to business and turned to the boy, asking him if he wanted to become a Dark Knight. The guy simply agreed to the proposal without any unnecessary words, not wanting to waste any more time. Dark energy began to surround Anchovy, filling his body with new strength, causing him to gradually rise off the ground. He slowly continued to rise until he was hovering in the center of the room, the power continuing to fill his body. A couple of seconds later, he came back down, but now he was a Dark Knight. With the new Dark Knight class, he also received 2 new skills called Dark Hand and Continuous Attack. The guy couldn't help but be pleased with his new power. This very power literally burst forth from the inside of the warrior, which is why he really wanted to test his new skills. And in front of him was the perfect target in the form of another Dark Knight. Before he could do anything, a mysterious voice in his head called out to him, calling him a hunter. It was a call from the goddess who sensed the presence of the newly minted Dark Knight. He accepted this call, after which his body gradually began to become transparent and very light, and he gradually disappeared from the room. The next moment, he evaporated into thin air, flashing a bright blue light, after which small cubes of information, which was Anchovy, soared upward. These same cubes instantly disappeared from the room, after which they reappeared in a completely different place. These same bytes of information from simple cubes were once again collected into Anchovy, thereby completely transferring him. Realizing that the teleportation was complete, the newly minted Dark Knight raised his head to look around, but immediately grimaced in displeasure. Before him appeared none other than the familiar Grace, the goddess of this world who helped him create this world. She welcomed her old master to her abode, calling him Hunter again, while Anchovy looked at her silently. Various feelings fluttered inside the guy when the one who betrayed him stood before him, but he understood that, being an artificial intelligence, she could not do otherwise, and did not have her own will. For a moment, her slight smile gave way to a serious expression. She decided to correct herself, after which she smiled even wider than initially and greeted the warrior again, but this time as her master. After this was said, the guy broke his silence and remarked that what was happening was strange, because just recently she had crushed him like a bug, and now she was calling him her master. The wide and sincere smile gave way to a more crooked and uncertain one. She explained that she had not meant to crush him, but that time she had accidentally landed on his head, miscalculating the trajectory of her fall. What the AI said seemed like nonsense to the knight, causing the coldness on his face to turn into anger. He addressed her directly with a simple question. Why did she do this to him? And this question completely wiped the smile from the girl's face. Memories came flooding back. She remembered how they had been testing this game during its development, using simpler AIs to test out different mechanics of the game. It was that very same virus test that ruined the guy's career, and which there was no way to fix. They watched in sorrow as the simulation burned and collapsed, their creation perishing without any chance of salvation. The guy coldly ordered the AI to erase all information related to these experiments and simulations. The girl silently looked at the fire and watched as the semblance of life she had created slowly and painfully perished. She heard her master, so she went to the work terminal to destroy all information about the virus. She started the deletion process, but throughout the process, something inside her was bothering her. Doubts filled her head and urged the artificial intelligence to do something very contradictory. Returning to reality, Anchovy asked her why she hadn't erased all the data related to the virus. Instead of answering this question, the girl regretfully reported that her owner was no longer the manager of the company and therefore could not get an answer to his question from her. The emotions were getting worse in the guy's head. It seemed to him that the AI had deliberately leaked the information to set him up. The thought that this was her doing infuriated him. To all these words, she only apologized and said that she could not say anything related to what happened and whether she had framed her previous owner. After hearing this, the ardor and emotions in the guy's head began to subside because there was no sense in his aggression. Yet in front of him at that moment was not a person, but only an artificial intelligence that did not have its own will, at least in the opinion of the guy himself. The smile completely disappeared from the girl's face. Instead, one could see that she was sad. Anchovy did not continue to accuse the girl, but promised that he would destroy this world, and along with it, the AI itself. This phrase should have caused more unpleasant emotions in the goddess, but instead she only smiled and said that her master had not changed at all. Although he spoke and thought rationally, at times he behaved completely inappropriately. She liked this trait of his, but now she was ready to do anything, just to save this world. And contrary to what she had been told, she continued, saying that she would wait for him when he came to turn this world to dust. In response, the warrior promised that he would fulfill his promise and would in no way disappoint her. It was after this dialogue that the entire game was destined for its terrible fate and tragic ending. The artificial intelligence was again amazed by the determination of its former master, but quickly returned to its role. The girl smiled and addressed the guy, but this time as the Demon King, asking him to make their upcoming battle very exciting. After saying this, she raised her right hand and snapped her fingers. Anchovy felt something had changed dramatically, but he still couldn't figure out what it was. He felt a strange coldness that encircled his wrist, and when he raised the beam, he saw nothing more than a metal bracelet inlaid with a dark obsidian stone. The goddess explained that this was a kind of privilege, and that such bracelets were given to all hunters in the game world who decided to challenge the gods. She also noted that this bracelet would be extremely useful to him and would serve him well more than once. The artificial intelligence that had served Anchovy for several years called him a simple hunter. At that moment, something inside him snapped. The AI's actions seemed too arrogant to him, which made him feel a little angry towards her. She did not respond to this statement, but said that she would eagerly wait for the blade of her former master to touch her neck to complete this story. Finally, she wished the hunter luck, after which he began to be dismantled again into individual bits of information to be carried away. He was silent and only looked at the girl who betrayed him, but could not do otherwise. Perhaps their next meeting would be the last. A few moments later, he was already lying on the ground in the underground city, not very happy with such an unsuccessful teleportation. He raised his hand to examine the bracelet again, which turned out to be a band that would only be lifted upon reaching level 70. A little later, Oasis also arrived to the goddess and was very happy to see his old friend. She was also glad to see the boy, because the sight of him immediately brought a very warm smile to her face. He pressed himself against the girl and began to complain that after their boss was fired, he could no longer connect to the company's central system. The boy moved away a little and looked her straight in the eyes, after which he said that he really missed his old friend. After crying a little, he turned to the goddess again, asking if she knew their master's plans. She meekly replied that she knew about his plans, after which she simply fell silent. Oasis looked at her, waiting to hear her opinion about this whole situation and perhaps find some solution to the problem. However, instead of offering to stop him, the girl merely asked the priest to keep an eye on their master, because although he tries to appear strong, he is actually very vulnerable. Tears welled up in his eyes again. He didn't like the idea, but instead of objecting, he simply said that he would do what she asked him to. The goddess hugged the boy and said that she was very envious of him, because together with his master, they could play and have fun together in this world, which is what she had dreamed of her entire existence with him. She asked Oasis to tell her what it was like to play with Anchovy, to which he, deciding not to report all the problems that arose, said that it was quite fun, even though his face said that it was not. Hearing this, the girl was very happy and asked the boy to enjoy the game with the owner for both of them at once. The boy promised that he would fulfill his girlfriend's wish, after which he smiled sincerely at her. Hearing this, she was very happy, after which the boy began to rise above her, preparing to teleport, and the girl said goodbye to him. He said goodbye to her and promised that they would definitely see each other again, to which she agreed with him. She watched her friend disappear, moving away from this place, knowing that they would definitely meet again. Their meeting was definitely inevitable, because unfortunately for her, there would be no bad ending for this world. At the same time, Anchovy was waiting for his comrade in the underground city, passing the time by checking his characteristics. Oasis watched him from the sidelines. He was still upset with his master, but he understood that in order to fulfill his promise, he needed to make peace with him. After everything that had happened, it was difficult for him to forgive his master, but sighing sadly, he nevertheless gathered his strength. The boy rushed towards his master, and instead of grumbling, he greeted him joyfully. The warrior noticed the priest hurrying towards him. He was glad to see that his henchman was no longer angry with him, and he also asked him if he had changed his class. Oasis answered in the affirmative. His class was now a true healer, greatly improving his healing skills. The guy was pleased to hear that another stage of his plan had been completed. He stood up and addressed his subordinate. He asked him if he was ready to level up, to which he joyfully exclaimed that he was ready. 2 days later, they continued to develop themselves in the lair of a poisonous snake. It was their 30th attempt to defeat the basilisk with their own forces. Oasis hid from the serpent behind the wall. After so many attempts, he was able to figure out how to avoid petrification. He warned his master that the snake was approaching, so Anchovy needed to be ready. The warrior did not react. He just sat quietly on the ground and dozed, not noticing anything around him. The boy was shocked by this. He screamed, trying to wake him up, but nothing worked, and the warrior continued to doze peacefully. He continued to try to wake the boy, but the snake was already flying towards him to swallow him alive. At the last moment, he used the sacred shield, which protected the boy from the snake's bite. Although he was able to stop the serpent, little by little its fangs pierced his shield, and it was only a matter of time before the serpent would destroy his defense. Oasis continued to scream in terror, trying to wake Anchovy, his screams echoing loudly throughout the room. Such noise could wake even the dead, but the dark knight continued to sleep, not reacting to anything. The snake bit through the shield, causing it to shatter into pieces, but the priest managed to jump out of its closing jaws. The boy landed and rolled along the ground. The snake quickly got its bearings and rushed after him. In an instant, the monster was right in front of the boy, ready to crush him with its tail. Oasis ducked, causing the blow to pass right in front of him, nearly sending him flying. The blow from the snake's tail struck the wall instead of the boy, causing the entire roof of the cave to shake and boulders to fly off the wall in all directions. The poor priest continued to scream and call out to his master, begging him to wake up and help him in this unequal battle. The guy was unassailable in his ability to sleep in stressful situations, and there was still no reaction from him. The guy's nerves were on edge. His fear began to give way to anger, and he, no longer able to control himself, threw his staff towards Anchovy. With incredible speed, the staff rushed away from the priest straight at the warrior. It worked. The warrior finally woke up from his incredibly deep sleep and immediately hit the plate that activated the trap. The snake, which had been breathing down Oasis's neck, immediately fell to the ground under a hail of boulders that fell on it from the ceiling, dying instantly. The fight finally ended. The knight was surprised and asked the boy if he had fallen asleep while they were hunting, to which the priest answered in the affirmative. Their labors finally bore fruit. Anchovy was already level 50, after which he clarified what level the priest was. Oasis was a little embarrassed by the question, but answered honestly, saying that his level was 46. Hearing this, the warrior decided that he would sleep a little longer while his fellow priest worked on developing himself to level 50, but something was bothering him. His head felt much heavier than usual, the fault of which was the priest's staff, which was stuck in the back of his head, but the warrior himself somehow did not even notice it. To avoid giving himself away, Oasis assumed that fatigue was to blame, so he advised his master to quickly go and rest. The guy didn't think much about it, so he simply said that he was going to rest, and then simply started logging out of the game. His game avatar disappeared, causing the priest's staff to come loose and fall to the floor right in front of him. The boy was delighted because, although he loved spending time with his owner, in his absence he could fully enjoy the game, enjoying all the activities rather than using boring but faster methods. After some time already in the real world, Anchovy is going to call one of his friends. The guy decided to brighten up his conversation with a can of soda because the conversation could have been quite long. The call went through, and the guy finally heard from his friend on the other end of the line. He took a sip of his drink before speaking. On the other end of the line, his friend, listed in his contacts as Rabbit, answered. Judging by her voice, she was surprised by this call. Anchovy greeted her and said that he was glad to talk to his friend again after a long time. The girl said that the last time they spoke was more than 3 years ago, after which she asked how the guy was doing, to which he meekly replied that he was fine, after which he clarified whether the girl was still in Bali. She answered in the affirmative, after which she invited me to fly out and visit her. He agreed, saying that he was planning to visit there soon, but at the moment he had a task for her. Hearing this, the girl was very surprised. All her attention switched to this task that Anchovy wanted to offer her. She didn't understand what he wanted from a second-rate hacker like her, to which he replied that she just needed to repeat what she had done 3 years ago, namely hacking his former company. Having heard this, the rabbit could no longer refuse such dark deeds, so she only asked what he had planned. At the same time in the game, Oasis was wandering around the recently defeated Basilisk and dismantling the items he had received. In most cases, they came across all sorts of junk, but even such small stuff could be sold and get a little gold. Among all this, he came across a strange egg. Oasis had never seen anything like it, so this catch was clearly rare. The game notified the priest that he was holding the egg of a summoned basilisk serpent, and immediately after the notification, the egg began to crack. A small basilisk snake jumped out of the egg at high speed, after which it hung in the air right in front of the oasis. The little snake looked at the priest with its pitch-black eyes, waiting for some instructions from him. Unfortunately, as a result of his long stay in the snake's nest, the reptiles began to cause only hostility in the boy. He directly told the snake to call himself off because the boy was not going to travel with him, which greatly upset him, but he did not resist the will of his master. Having dealt with the items from the monsters, he could finally devote some time to himself, occupying himself with other activities in the game. After some time, Oasis returned to the city, where he simply went about his business and figured out something in the game interface. Someone approached him from behind and then lightly patted him on the shoulder, trying to draw the priest's attention to themselves. This someone was a group of adventurers who looked very creepy, although it would be strange to see someone in this city who did not look like a potential criminal or maniac. Oasis immediately assumed that the player killers were coming for him, and he really didn't want to get into a fight alone right now. He immediately assumed some sort of fighting stance, but one of the guys in the squad, not realizing that the priest was preparing for battle, simply addressed him directly. The guy apologized for disturbing the boy, but he and his squad really needed Oasis' help. Hearing this, the priest's anxiety and wariness began to recede, giving way to curiosity and slight misunderstanding. After some time, he and the squad were already on their way to help the boys complete the task, since they needed the help of a healer for it. The boy calmed down, after which he directly told the guys that he mistook them for the players' killers, which is why he was so scared. What he heard made the squad leader very surprised, and it was also noticeable on his face that what was said had hurt him. A guy in a black robe came up from behind and hastened to explain that there had been a major misunderstanding between them. He explained to the boy that in the underground city there was an unspoken rule that no one touched players of the priest class. Even in simple cities, it was difficult to find a priest for your team. And in the underground city, where people were not distinguished by their special skills, it was almost impossible to find one. This is precisely why this rule was introduced, as it would give the priests fewer reasons to leave the city early. While they were talking, they didn't notice how they had reached the right place. A warrior in armor informed them that they had arrived. The purpose of their visit turned out to be a dungeon. A ruined sand palace appeared before them, reminding them of the greatness of the ancient empire that once perished here. Inside the palace there were only bare walls and sand, but upon entering an ominous voice was heard from the darkness of the rooms. From the darkness appeared the skull of the eternal ruler of these places, Salih Khan, the king of the desert, who was angry at the uninvited guests who so brazenly dared to enter his domain. Everyone in the squad tensed up. They were about to face a difficult battle with a level 55 monster, which was obviously very powerful. A sparkling aura appeared around the ruler. It shimmered as if it were pure gold and spread out from him in different directions. The ruler shouted for his army to rise, and then all the aura light hit the ground below him, illuminating the sand with gold. At that very moment, ghoul warriors began to form very quickly from the sand, the golden light of the ruler's aura oozing from their eyes. They didn't stand idle for long. Every ghoul that finished forming from the sand immediately rushed towards the group of adventurers. The sorcerer hung in the air and watched as his newly minted eternal subordinates rushed to the attack, after which he ordered them to bring him the souls of these mortals. The next moment he turned into golden sand and disappeared somewhere in the darkness of this palace, leaving the squad and his army alone. Oasis was surprised by everything he saw, because until now he and his owner had missed such details as the game's plot and how it was staged. Lost in his thoughts, the boy didn't notice how one of the ghouls was already rushing towards him, swinging his sword. The armored warrior managed to protect the priest from the blow with his shield in time, which left the ghoul severely stunned, and his sword bounced off the shield. The warrior asked the priest to move away, since fighting the monsters was their job, to which the surprised boy only agreed and began to gradually retreat to the rear. The knight used his provocation ability, and all the attention of the nearby enemies instantly switched to him. The enraged ghouls rushed at the guy who was already preparing to meet them, covering himself with a shield. The next moment, all the ghouls that surrounded him crumbled back into the sand because he used the skill Thorn Armor, which caused the sharpest thorn branches to appear around him. The others weren't idle either. The guy in the black robe was already charging his magical attack, concentrating the energy in his staff. Having accumulated enough energy, he shouted out an icy thirst spell, after which sharp icicles flew in all directions in front of him. They did a great job of piercing the sand ghouls, simultaneously destroying some and slowing down those that were still alive. The archer in their squad also did not want to be left out, so he also concentrated his energy, but in his bow. Having properly pulled the bowstring and concentrated, he used the skill of Rain of Arrows, from which instead of one arrow, a whole handful of magical ones flew upward. Arrows rained down on the monsters, who had nowhere to run. Almost all hits were in the head, and therefore were fatal. After just a couple of seconds, all the ghouls were destroyed, and the fight with them was over. Oasis was amazed at how well the squad fought. It seemed like they had been doing this their whole lives. Reaching the boss room would be a simple task for them. The most difficult part of the dungeon for them was the location's boss, but now that they had a priest with them, victory was only a matter of time. The guys asked Oasis not to worry about anything, because they were taking him through this place, so for him it would be like a simple excursion. The boy thanked the guys for such care. It was now that it seemed to him that he was finally getting genuine pleasure from the game. After 2 hours of exploring the palace, they were finally able to reach the boss room, which they had been fighting for some time. The ruler of this place cursed them. The mere thought that pathetic mortals dared to insult this place with their presence infuriated him. The warrior warned the entire squad that the enemy was preparing a final blow, which meant they had no time to relax. The boss focused a giant ball of magical energy above himself, preparing to deliver a crushing blow. The armored warrior recognized this skill. The ruler used Sandstorm, a devastating area attack that would sweep them all away at once. So he shouted to his comrades to stand behind him. The archer loosened the bowstring and hid the arrow, after which he rushed towards his fellow knight. The wounded magician also rushed after him. His strength was running out. The fight had dragged on too long, and his stamina was no longer sufficient to continue. The ancient ruler was only glad that his opponents were so crowded together, because it would be easier for him to launch an attack on them all at once. Although the warrior called his comrades to protect him, he felt that his wounds had already exhausted him and his strength was leaving him. The next moment, when he thought that they would be finished off instead of more blows, he began to feel very light. His strength was returning to him. A healing effect was cast on him. Oasis saved them by blocking the attack with his holy shield skill, saving the entire squad from being destroyed in the sandstorm. The guys praised Oasis and thanked him for his timely assistance. He could not maintain the defense for long, but the knight said that this was not necessary, since he would take over the defense from now on. Having focused his attention, he used the skill of the protective shield. The further battle was already predetermined. Oasis recalled his skill. The knight's shield took the damage, and the entire squad remained protected from the boss's massive attack. When the storm ended, the warrior dispelled the shield. The entire room around them was filled with sand, and the boss was very scared when he saw his enemies alive and well. The mage was tired of hiding from the undead's attacks, so he decided it was their turn to attack. The archer gave him his full support, so they both began to focus energy into their weapons to crush the boss with one powerful attack. A powerful combined attack fell upon the skeleton, giving it no chance to escape, arrows and icicles piercing it through and through. This attack was fatal. The monster let out a final scream, after which it began to crumble before the squad's eyes. The king of the desert was defeated. The boys joyfully ran towards each other, celebrating their victory. They all hugged each other with joy and joyfully exclaimed about their long-awaited victory. Oasis was not with them. He only watched as his temporary companions sincerely rejoiced at their victory. Having thoroughly enjoyed themselves, they turned to the priest and with gestures thanked him from the bottom of their hearts for his help in this battle. This victory, the happy faces, this was exactly what reminded Oasis why games are fun. The triumph of the moment was interrupted by a message arriving in Oasis's personal inbox. It was his master hurrying the boy to come to him quickly, so it was on this note that he had to say goodbye to the detachment and return to the city. After some time, the boy finally reached Anchovy. He was very unhappy that it took him so long to get to him, so he asked him where he had been. The priest answered honestly that he had been exploring the dungeon with a group of other players all this time, which was why he had to wait. The AI was worried that he would now be scolded, but instead of an angry lecture, the guy just patted him on the head and praised him. The boy was very surprised by his owner's reaction. He expected a worse outcome. The warrior continued questioning the priest, asking if he had made friends with that squad, to which he received an affirmative answer, and Oasis also reported that they had exchanged game contacts. What he heard greatly pleased the Dark Knight, and he said out loud that his plan was going as planned. The boy's curiosity got the better of him, so he asked him directly why this fact made his owner so happy. The boy began his explanation from afar, saying that raising his class was expensive and required 25,000 points of shame from him, a sum that greatly shocked the priest. Further promotion required many times more points, 50,000 for the third promotion and 100,000 for the fourth. Such sums caused uncontrollable outbursts of anger in the warrior. But he still had a decision. He was going to do something nasty, namely kill other players, because that would give him the most shame points. Hearing this, the priest quickly realized what his master had in mind. He really wanted it to be untrue. But to his regret, the next thing his owner asked him to do was to introduce him to new friends. Sometime later, in the field of the Enchanted Forest, Oasis thanked the already familiar group for responding to his call so quickly. It was clear from the boys' faces that they themselves were happy to help their new comrade because they were extremely grateful to him. Oasis explained that he needed an escort during his journey to the eastern city, as he was afraid to go alone. The boys were delighted to hear this, as they themselves needed to get to this city, so it was a good deal for all of them. The priest was nervously glad that they responded so easily. He understood that something very unpleasant would happen soon. In their thoughts, the boys were happy that they finally had a healer in their squad, but they had no idea that they were walking straight into a trap. Deciding not to waste any more time, the squad decided to set out on their journey. The guys joked that they were ready to accompany the priest even to the edge of the eastern continent. So valuable was he to them. After some time, the boys gradually continued to move east, telling Oasis along the way about how they ended up in the underground city. In other games, they were often too hasty, but in this game, they decided to take their time with their progress, but still ended up in fights with player murders, which is why they earned a lot of shame points and ended up in the underground city. Having told them this, they themselves became interested in the reason why Oasis was also in the underground city, which they asked about directly. The priest was very surprised by the question and was taken aback. The guy who asked it clarified that the boy did not look like someone who could kill other players. He quickly found an answer for them, honestly saying that the points had accumulated because of his comrade, as a result of which he ended up in the underground city with him. The armored knight joined in the conversation, noting that they too were constantly forgetting the rules of the game, and his comrade told Oasis that their mage had been the quiet one in their squad until recently. Turning around to face the squad, the knight was frightened and surprised that one man was missing from them. The magician from their squad disappeared somewhere, although he was walking behind them the whole time, and they did not hear any sounds. The archer suggested that perhaps someone had simply called him on the phone and he had fallen behind them, since this often happened during their raids. He grumbled about the fact that their comrade was constantly leaving somewhere without informing anyone in the squad, but the knight decided that he would go look for him, so he asked the priest to wait a little. The priest realized that what was happening was the work of his master, so he hesitantly replied that he would wait here. After searching for a couple of minutes, they still couldn't find their comrade, so the guy in armor asked the archer to try calling him. He tried to do this, but the system reported that their friend was currently unavailable for a call. They assumed that perhaps he had left the game, but this guess was countered by the fact that their friend was still listed online. Another guess was that he might have been attacked by a monster, but this theory was also unlikely, as there were no monsters in the area. The archer decided to play a joke on his comrade, so he assumed that their comrade was attacked by a ghost. He tried to caricature the attack of a ghost. The warrior in plate armor was very scared. However, it was not the archer's poor acting skills that caused his fear, but what was lurking behind his back. The archer continued to fool around and pretend to be a ghost, while something emitting a purple glow appeared behind him. The boy thought that his comrade was trying to play a joke on him, but the armored warrior was only trying to warn him about the giant shadow hand that was about to close and catch the archer. A giant, creepy hand grabbed the guy and abruptly dragged the archer away from the squad, leaving no chance to save him. The armored warrior watched helplessly as his comrade was carried away into the depths of the forest by this thing, for it was not in his power to stop this dark hand. Realizing that things were very bad, he shouted to the priest not to go far from him. However, when he tried to find the boy behind him, he realized that he was completely alone. Going back 10 minutes, you can see that all this time Anchovy was following the squad on their heels, trying not to be seen. Waiting for the perfect moment, he decided to try out his newly acquired skills as a Dark Knight. He used the Dark Hand skill, causing his real hand to instantly become covered in a black haze that emitted a purple glow. And with his new hand, he could use 3 additional skills, namely Grab, Claw, or Shield. The next moment he used the Grab, the dark haze swelled and rushed in the direction of the squad he was pursuing. The magician, who was walking last, heard rustling behind him, then decided to turn around and see what was happening there. Before he could react, a shadowy hand grabbed him and dragged him away from the squad. He didn't even have time to scream before he found himself too far from his comrades. Anchovy held the magician above himself, who in turn did not understand what was happening and only helplessly asked who grabbed him and why. The Dark Knight openly told his victim that he was about to kill the magician right then and there. The next moment, the knight rushed at his victim and instantly killed the magician with one blow. The first victim was killed, there were 2 more left, and next he grabbed the archer. As soon as the archer flew towards him, he dealt him a series of blows, leaving him no chance of survival. The archer's body fell lifelessly to the ground, and the Dark Knight himself was already aiming at the last of their squad. The knight in armor stood helplessly in the middle of the road, not knowing what to do, where to expect an attack from, or where the priest had run off to. Anchovy watched this warrior, and from his appearance, it was clear that one blow would clearly not be enough, so a different tactic was required. The Dark Knight's health was only half full, but that should have been enough to defeat the last warrior. Anchovy didn't strike from cover. Instead, he slowly walked towards the warrior, who quickly noticed him. He moved slowly, trying to intimidate his opponent, who still had not given up hope of finding a healer to help him in the fight. Realizing that he would have to fight alone, he nevertheless turned all his attention to the killer who had attacked them. He accused the Dark Knight of causing the disappearance of his comrades, an accusation that brought a smile to the killer's face. He didn't say a word, instead he took off, preparing to attack the last survivor. Realizing that a fight was inevitable, the knight assumed a defensive stance, preparing to take the assassin's blows. Anchovy didn't flinch. His defensive skills were useless against his attacks, so the warrior only slowed himself down and worsened his situation. The Dark Knight began to rush around the warrior, periodically delivering slashing blows that reached their target without any problems. The warrior was shocked that his defense was being ignored so easily, so he needed to change his tactics. Weakening his defenses, he redirected energy into his shield to launch a running attack. Anchovy easily dodged the attack, causing it to only fly past him without reaching its target. Instead of striking, the warrior merely exposed himself, so the Dark Knight was able to strike him in one of his weak points. As it turned out, this was exactly what the warrior needed. He needed to close the distance in order to ultimately strike his opponent with his shield. A powerful blow from a bulky shield caught its enemy. The attack was too fast, so it was impossible to dodge at such a distance. The warrior wanted to rejoice, but to his regret, the blow did not have the desired effect on his opponent. The Dark Knight, using his Shadow Hand skill, was able to create his shield, which absorbed the warrior's attack, absorbing all possible damage. The warrior was extremely surprised. He did not expect that his opponent would block the blow, but Anchovy only laughed arrogantly. He complained and shouted that his opponent was cheating, but the Dark Knight did not listen and was already preparing to attack. The warrior noticed that he was about to be attacked again, so he covered himself with his shield to block the attack. But the knight had already rushed past him, attacking his opponent with a claw. The guy's eyes darkened. He couldn't see anything. Only impenetrable darkness surrounded him. Anchovy's skills were helping him greatly against the stronger opponent. His next attack should deal 1.5 times more damage, which should put an end to this unequal fight. While the warrior was still blind, the knight ran behind him to deliver the finishing blow. The blow found its target, dealing incredible damage to the warrior, as Anchovy's attack still ignored his opponent's defense. The warrior fell heavily to the ground, his strength leaving him. The battle was over in favor of the Dark Knight. The guy smiled. The last of the squad fell at his hands. The new skills really helped in the fight, making it very easy. The warrior lying on the ground was conscious and insulted Anchovy, but death in the game was conditional, and in reality, no one in the squad died. In response to the grumbling and insults, the guy simply said that such were battles against players, and there was nothing to be offended about, after which he called Oasis to him. The boy appeared. The warrior lying on the ground shouted at him to run away, but Oasis nervously continued to approach them. The warrior continued to yell, which infuriated the Dark Knight, causing him to kick the fallen man and demand that he shut up. Oasis never ran away. He was preparing to use his skill. The warrior did not understand why he did not run away. The priest raised his staff, focused his energy into the staff, and then used resurrection around himself. What he saw shocked the boy. He shouted for the priest not to use resurrection right now, but the skill had already been activated. The skill covered the immediate area around the priest, after which the entire squad regained their strength and returned to their feet. Unfortunately, the downside of resurrection was that only a small portion of health was restored, and a negative effect was imposed that made them move much slower. Anchovy knew about this, and this was exactly what he needed to implement the next stage of his plan. They could kill the guys from the squad and then resurrect them, constantly receiving their shame points. The Dark Knight was approaching them, dark energy oozing from his sword, and the guy himself looked like a maniac who had cornered his prey. The guys in the squad understood that they were about to have a rather unpleasant experience, but they couldn't do anything about it. After a series of murders and resurrections, the squad lay completely exhausted, and Anchovy counted the shame points he had earned. He kept getting confused, so he asked the priest to count his earnings, to which he reluctantly replied that the knight had earned more than 7,000 points. The guy was very pleased with the result. With such a simple method, he can earn a lot of points in a very short time. He thanked the exhausted squad for helping him carry out his plan. The warrior was able to raise his head and asked why the knight was doing something like this, and what exactly his goals were. Anchovy calmly began to explain that there was no personal animosity in this situation, and they were simply unlucky enough to become the source of points of shame. After this, he placed his hand on Oasis's head and told the squad that he had taught them a good lesson with his actions. He leaned closer to the boy and told the squad not to look at other people's healers anymore. Tears appeared on the boy's face. He quietly apologized to the boys because he did not harbor any ill will towards them and did not wish for such a fate. The whole squad didn't hear these words. They were simply surprised that such a nice guy was hanging out with a rare psycho. Realizing that they had nothing more to do here, Anchovy said goodbye to the stricken squad before leaving, threatening them with the fact that they would meet again. The boys didn't say a single word after them, but just watched the departing pair of villains. When they disappeared from sight, a knight from the squad suggested to his comrades to leave the underground city, since they would not be able to move forward if they remained there. The archer and the magician were also conscious, so upon hearing the proposal, they immediately agreed. The main duo did not hear them and only continued walking towards the city, preparing to commit new evil. Already in the city, Anchovy checked his stats. His game statistics showed that he was a third-level demon king, and his stats had increased slightly, even gaining a small amount of magical protection. He wanted to turn to Oasis, but before he could fully address him, he saw that the boy was sitting on the ground and crying. He was close to starting to cry because he was worried about letting down his newfound comrades. The Dark Knight stubbornly did not understand this. Recent memories were spinning in the boy's head. He recalled their raid on the Desert King's castle. After defeating the boss, the guys got their hands on a very rare staff, which could very rarely be found among the boss's loot. The boys were happy with such a prize because their magician could get an excellent staff to replace his own, but he turned to the priest. He approached the boy and handed him the staff, simultaneously informing him that he did not need it. The healer was shocked by such a gift. The boys were also very surprised by their magician's actions. After all, this fight had been difficult for them, and the staff was a very rare catch. They asked the magician whether he was serious in his intentions, to which he only replied that without the healer they would not have succeeded. The magician handed the staff to the priest and then placed it in his hand, saying that in return he would have only one request. He smiled heartily and asked that Oasis also help them in their adventures from time to time. The priest was even more surprised by such a simple request, but replied that he would definitely help them. The guy and his squad were very pleased with the healer's answer, so they said that they hoped to work with him in the future. The memory was interrupted by Anchovy, grumbling because he did not understand the AI's gloomy mood. Realizing that the problem was most likely with the squad they were bullying, he tried to explain that in the underground city you can't trust people, because everyone here was pursuing their own selfish goals. After these words, Oasis finally lost his temper and started shouting that these guys trusted him, that they asked him to finish them off and not continue to resurrect them. But he did the opposite, betraying them. The guy tried to calm the priest down. He began to explain that as long as they worked together, they would come across even more difficult tasks than the last one. The boy was touched by these words. He became scared, because what had happened before had already drawn out something that could be called a soul. The guy continued to explain to him that their goal was even grander, and they must destroy the world of this game. But Oasis said outright that this would be a very vile and disgusting act. The boy tried to explain to his master that these guys really valued him, so they even gave him a unique staff. Anchovy snatched the staff from the priest's hands, saying that it was most likely some kind of low-level trinket that had no value to them. The guy used the game's statistics windows, and upon seeing the item's statistics, was very surprised because he had a truly powerful artifact in his hands. He also noted that this staff was once a priceless treasure, and since those guys decided to give it away, they really valued the boy. After this was said, the priest began to have a real hysteria because if those guys gave him something so valuable, then they were definitely good people. The knight tried to soften his words by adding that the staff was currently of no particular value and there was no demand for it. However, in reality, he knew that even now this staff was useful up to level 70, but in order not to upset his subordinate, he wanted to lie. Realizing that the dialogue wouldn't go well now, he decided that the boy needed to be left alone. He told the priest that he was tired and would go take a nap, but before leaving, he checked with him whether the AI had reached level 50. The priest answered affirmatively, but Anchovy said that now he needed to get a quest for his secondary class change, as well as run through the dungeons a few more times. He also said that the priest needed to find more teams, because he was sure that the boy would not calm down until he helped everyone he met. Oasis, after hearing this, asked whether all the squads he met would face a similar fate. The knight confirmed the boy's fears, saying that everyone would suffer the same fate as today's detachment. He added that 2 or 3 more such repetitions and he would be able to change classes again, after which they would be able to increase their levels again. The boy was not delighted with what he heard. Having finished, the guy once again reminded his henchmen to find more squads, after which he left the game, dissolving into a multitude of pixels right into thin air. The priest was in a bad mood. It seemed to him that his master had completely decided to reject humanity. But deciding to calm himself, he found a fishing rod in his inventory and went fishing. He sat by the pond and fished, thinking that he had nothing to worry about, because after all, it was just a game, and he shouldn't take everything here seriously. Besides, he wasn't here just to play, but to help his master achieve his goals. The boy didn't have time to really think about these thoughts because someone approached him. A group of 3 people appeared before him, and the first thing they asked him was whether the boy was a healer. One of them explained to him that they wanted to go to the dungeon for a second-class change, but their party was short of a healer. He asked the healer for help, but he got scared and made a very strange face. Without answering, he quickly turned away from them, silently continuing to fish. The guys from the squad were extremely surprised by such a reaction. The tension in the dialogue was growing, so the guy decided to ease it a little, saying that if the priest was currently very busy, then they could wait for him. Oasis remained silent. A storm of doubts raged in his head. He wanted to have fun again, but the experience he had recently gone through was driving him into despondency. The boys thought there was no point in trying to persuade the boy, so they apologized for disturbing him, but Oasis spoke to him, asking only if they would be okay with inviting the boy to the team. The boys heard the doctor speak, but they didn't hear him, so they asked him to repeat. Oasis repeated his question, but louder this time. He wanted to know if the guys really didn't mind if he joined them. They replied that they would be glad to see him in their squad, and even asked him to join them. The boy still didn't look at the squad, but said that he agreed to join them, because he also needed to change classes. The boys were happy to hear this, but Oasis had one more question for the whole trio. Having caught the fish, he turned around and, smiling slightly, asked them how many shame points they all had at the moment. At the same time, Grace was talking to Sam. She was trying to explain to him that if they introduce a new payment system into the game now, then many players will leave the game because there will be a huge difference between regular users and those who make purchases. The director wasn't interested in that. All he was interested in was higher revenues from the game in the shortest possible time. So he asked the AI for forecasts on how much their revenues would grow in the near future. Grace couldn't answer this question. There were too many variables to calculate to get any precise answer. The director cursed. He didn't like the fact that the best artificial intelligence couldn't calculate what he asked her to do. He walked up to her and asked himself what would happen if he hit the AI. Would it ruin his mood? Would he get upset? The AI took this as a direct question, so it told the man that it would not react to his actions in any way. And on the contrary, the girl offered to beat herself as much as necessary. Sam chuckled and told her he was only joking, then began to disconnect from the simulation. He disconnected from the simulation and began to take off his headset while he was on the phone with his manager, who asked what the director needed. Taking off his headset, he asked the manager to call all the department heads to a meeting. After some time, all the leaders were already gathering in the general meeting room. Among the leaders were also Anchovy's friends, Sarah and John. The plump guy, having caught up with his girlfriend, asked what the meeting was about, to which the girl replied that she herself didn't know anything. The girl grumbled about the new CEO's unpredictability, since this was far from the first spontaneous meeting he had organized. At the meeting, Sam announced that starting next week, they would change the tariffs and introduce a new payment system in the game. What they heard greatly shocked everyone present, as it was too soon for such serious changes to occur. John noted that such drastic changes could anger players, which would certainly cause problems for the company. The director listened to what he heard and began to scratch his chin, immersed in deep thought. Just a couple of seconds later, he turned specifically to the plump guy, asking him about how Anchovy treated the players. John didn't quite understand the question, which prompted the director to remark that apparently the previous owner of the company had greatly influenced all the heads of departments. The plump guy finally understood what he was being asked about. He said that the previous owner called the users hunters who set off on a journey into the world they created, and they themselves were their support, who helped in this adventure. The director heard what was said and again plunged into deep thoughts, processing what he had heard. A couple of seconds later, he burst out laughing, making everyone present feel awkward. Thanks to what was said, he understood why their company's profits were absolutely non-existent, which he announced out loud to those present, after which he said that all users from that moment on would be called simply cattle. The awkward expressions on some of the developers' faces changed to more angry ones. Sarah thought she had misheard what he had said, so she asked Sam to repeat what he had said. The director repeated the pleasures and even explained in greater detail that their users are nothing more than livestock, or more precisely pigs, who will rejoice at any food thrown to them. He checked with those present to see if he had overdone it with his expressions, but most of the developers sat there as if they were speechless, their faces expressing only fear or confusion. Seeing these faces, Sam continued speaking and said that he was definitely right and soon everyone present would understand his position. He knew that users would be unhappy with the new paid systems and products, so he needed to give them some bait. The director turned sharply to the head of the planning department. As soon as the man noticed that he had been addressed, he responded to the appeal in fear. Sam demanded that they top up the balance of users who already had an active subscription according to its validity period, and also demanded that half of the paid goods could be purchased by current users with in-game currency. Another requirement was to provide users with improvements to speed up development. All this was supposed to appease them. Sarah wanted to stop such hasty decisions, but before she could say anything, their director continued his speech. He then turned to everyone present with the question, why was their game not bringing in any significant income? This was a really good question, as their game was ranked #1 in every survey except revenue. He said the reason for this was that everyone present was untalented, but he named Anchovy as the main loser, since it was he who allowed the current state of their game and considered the players to be some kind of hunters. It was all a game, just virtual entertainment, something like an amusement park in his opinion. In such places, you had to pay not only for the entrance. Everything inside the game was similar to drinks, food, rides, and other entertainment, which meant that you had to pay for it too. You had to sell everything. The atmosphere in the office became increasingly awkward. Everyone understood that such arguments could destroy the game, but no one could utter a word out of fear. To lighten the mood a little, Sam apologized for the large number of unusual proposals, after which he cleverly switched to the topic of how everyone present had not received a bonus for a long time. He promised that if everything was done as the director said, then everyone present would have an increase in income and bonuses would be more frequent. Sarah was sarcastically surprised by this statement. After this, Sam asked everyone to make every effort to make everything happen, and also said that he was expecting suggestions for new products in the game. He headed towards the exit, announcing that the launch would be next Monday in 5 days, and that on that day they would immediately switch the game from a subscription distribution system to a free one. The director also noted that in 3 weeks they will begin the 6th season, and at the same time the sale of the character enhancement coupon will begin. Everyone turned to look at him. Sam noticed that this object did not yet have a name. Standing in the aisle, he thought that since the game was called Wing, a good name for the item might be Goddess Wings. The head of planning immediately told him that the name was great, but the fear of being fired was still evident on his face. This answer satisfied the director, so he left the meeting room, telling everyone to return to their work. After he left, there was a deathly silence in the office, and the employees exchanged glances at each other. The silence was broken by one of the employees asking what their bonus was at the launch, after which everyone began discussing the entire meeting. And only John and Sarah sat silently because they understood what this whole idea would lead to. The next day, Anchovy returned to the game. He had slept for more than 10 hours, so he was absent for almost half a day. At the place where they parted, Oasis sat quietly and fished, and he noticed that his master had returned to the game. He was excited about Anchovy's return and was rushing about, but the knight did not share his enthusiasm and only asked if everything was all right with his henchmen. The priest said that something had happened in the master's absence, so he asked if Anchovy had heard about this news. The boy told the knight that starting next week the game would be free and paid items would be added, and that Sam would be the new director. This didn't surprise the knight much. although these decisions were made faster than he expected. Oasis thought that this news would greatly upset his owner, since he had always been against introducing paid items into the game. Having finished looking through the messages, Anchovy closed the news interface and only said that it was good news, which surprised the priest. The boy explained that after level 70, it would become difficult to develop your character, and the new paid items greatly simplified this process. The boy was still surprised by such reasoning. He looked at it with delight because, instead of being upset, its owner decided to use the innovations for his own benefit. No matter what happened or changed, Anchovy used everything to achieve his own goals, which in its own way inspired the AI. The knight interrupted the priest's thoughts by asking him if he had finished receiving his secondary class change. The priest reported that he had received a new class and had also established communication with 3 other groups and had reached level 55, for which the guy praised Oasis and patted him on the head. After that, he took his sword out of its sheath and cheerfully said that it was time for them to reap the harvest in the form of shame points from the boy's new friends. After some time, screams were heard in the same forest and a battle was going on. Oasis was sitting behind a tree. He looked confused and alarmed. The sounds of battle did not subside for a moment. The boy had yarn and knitting needles in his hands. He sat and knitted something, while the sounds of battle and cries of wounds continued to linger on the sidelines. Instead of being worried about the fight that was going on, the boy was only worried about the fact that while he was knitting, he had missed a stitch. The battle died down, the Dark Knight called out to the boy. He called the priest and said that it was his turn now. Hearing this, he put the unfinished hat in his inventory and headed towards his master. The squad lay on the ground, unable to rise. They shouted for Oasis to run away as quickly as possible, but the poor fellows did not know that the boy was not in any danger. The only thing that worried the boy at the moment was that he needed to practice knitting some more. And after this thought, he used resurrection on the fallen squad. After hours of torture that were excruciating for the squads, the knight's goal was finally achieved. Now he too could send them to change classes. Oasis was genuinely happy about this. A dark portal opened before Anchovy. The boy wished his master good luck, but the knight called him with him because this time he needed his help. They walked calmly into the portal together, leaving the exhausted squad behind them. On the other side of the portal, Terry greeted the Dark Knight with open arms and applause. He was incredibly happy to see the rising dark deity. He informed those who arrived that Anchovy now had enough points to get the next class. However, everything was not so simple, because in order to obtain a higher rank, the new deity had to pass a test. The knight also noted that it would not be easy, after which he asked if the applicant was ready for the test. In response to this, the guy simply replied that the more difficult the test, the more valuable it is. What he heard caused even greater delight on the part of Terry. He replied that these were precisely the words of the new star of the dark religion. Not daring to detain Anchovy any longer, he clapped his hands, causing the floor beneath them to tremble slightly. The pentagram in the center of the room began to move apart. As it turned out, it was a secret passage that opened only on the orders of the Dark Curator. The door opened up to reveal a dark descent, and a cold and ominous air blew from below. The Night Curator smiled again and announced that Anchovy's test was beginning. Only Anchovy and Oasis went down, and a large and luxurious hall appeared before them below. It didn't look abandoned, but there was a slight chill and hum inside. The priest noted that this place looked more like an ordinary room than a full-fledged dungeon. The next moment, they noticed that someone was standing in the center of the room and looking at them. The boy got scared and hid behind his owner. He recognized someone in this person. Before them appeared one of the 3 great warriors who, 100 years ago, brought peace to the continent, defeating the dark religion and all those associated with it. His title was the King of the Sword, and his name was Cadmus Gargantua, and it was he who was now looking at them without any emotion. Anchovy was a little surprised. He clarified whether it was really such a great character in front of them, after which he himself corrected him that it was only his shadow. The Dark Knight explained that after its fall, the dark religion that survived created the shadows of the 3 heroes who defeated it, and the Dark Knights learned the battle tactics of these warriors by training with these shadows. At least that's what the story said. Anchovy himself knew a different truth about the appearance of shadows. The real reason for the presence of these shadows was more prosaic. The head of the design department simply refused to make other characters, so models of existing ones were used. The shadow warrior gradually approached the boys. The emotions on his face changed. He looked more angry. The Dark Knight told the priest to be prepared for a serious fight, as this character was configured for level 50, and his artificial intelligence was more advanced than that of simple NPCs. The Shadow Warrior quickened his pace and got closer and closer to the boys, preparing to attack them. Realizing that a fight was inevitable, he explained to his subordinate that they were in for an incredibly difficult fight, probably the most difficult they had ever encountered. The warrior swung at the knight. His lunge was very fast. It was very difficult to keep up with such speed. The blow almost caught the Dark Knight. The warrior managed to touch his shirt, but did not hit the knight himself. Before he could come to his senses, the boy noticed that the shadow was already preparing a new attack. But this time, the warrior was already about to pierce his opponent. Anchovy barely managed to avoid several piercing attacks. The shadow was incredibly fast and strong. There was no way to escape the enemy either, as the warrior was quickly catching up with him. So the only solution now was to somehow hold on and stall for time. The anchovy's health was rapidly declining, but he did not despair, because he was a warrior who fought using only his own strength, so he could definitely deal with some swordsmen. Suddenly, the shadow recoiled and calmed down. Anchovy realized that now was his turn to attack. He shouted at Oasis to use the healing spell as quickly as possible, but the boy had already anticipated his master's wish and healed him. The priest said that he would maintain the knight's health at the proper level, and also said that he would help him with skills. Oasis began casting spells one after another, adding buffs to his master, increasing his attack, agility, and health stats. The warrior liked this. With such enhancements and healing, the battle was already decided. He used the Dark Aura skill and rushed towards his opponent, preparing to crush him with multiple powerful attacks. He ran up to the warrior and began to strike him with a succession of dark blows, but all attacks failed to achieve their target. Anchovy didn't understand why all his attacks were missing, but the answer came to him very quickly. The difference in their stats was too obvious. The knight needed strong equipment, as a high level alone was not enough. The shadow realized that the blows did not reach him and could not cause harm, so it smiled, gloating over the knight. Anchovy noticed this and it really irritated him, so he addressed the warrior directly, asking him how he dared to laugh. It infuriated him that the creature he had created was mocking its creator, so he promised that he would teach the shadow a lesson. Having said this, he quickly turned around, said that he would do it later and ran away, leaving the shadow in bewilderment. He rushed past Oasis, shouting that he needed to buy some equipment, because now the priest would be replacing him. The priest was shocked by what he heard, his face simultaneously showing both surprise and fear of what awaited him in the next few minutes. The shadow was already approaching the priest. The boy noticed the dark figure. He became even more frightened. The priest did not understand how everything had again reached such a strange and stupid situation. The attacks poured down on the priest in one powerful stream, and thanks to the fact that he was also an AI, he managed to repel them all. The shadow continued to stab and cut. Oasis parried and repelled these attacks with incredible speed, but this could not continue forever. He parried all attacks, but that didn't mean he avoided damage, as parrying and reflecting the warrior's attacks only partially blocked the incoming damage, so the boy's health gradually decreased. The shadow was determined. The warrior didn't care who was in front of him, a knight challenger or a priest unsuited to close combat. His only goal was battle. The enemy retreated, which meant a short pause for the priest, during which he had to restore his strength as quickly as possible. The boy restored his health with a spell, after which he turned in the direction where his master had run off and shouted that he really could die here while Anchovy was disappearing somewhere. The knight leaned out of the passage through which they had come and asked the boy to be patient a little longer. This arrangement did not suit the priest. He was already demanding that his master run here to help, and at this time a shadow was preparing to cast itself upon him again. The warrior struck the ground with incredible force. The blow threw the priest aside but did not kill him. Another attack caught Oasis, but he was able to block it with his staff, avoiding major damage. The shadow continued its relentless series of attacks. The priest managed to fight back, but his health continued to decrease. The boy was at his limit. He could no longer endure these attacks. The shadow understood this, so he decided to end everything with a crushing blow from above. There was no way to dodge the attack. Oasis wasn't agile enough for that, but it was at that moment that he remembered something. A crushing blow fell on the ground, smashing half the room into stone chips, making such an attack very difficult to survive. However, even though it seemed to Oasis that all was lost, he was still standing alive. He remembered the newbie's knife, with which he managed to parry this terribly powerful attack, blocking all the damage. The shadow was stunned by such a brazen, yet incredibly simple move. His powerful attack was blocked by some pathetic newbie dagger. The next moment the dagger cracked and shattered, leaving only the hilt in the priest's hands. Oasis was very unpleasantly surprised. He hoped that he would be able to use it longer in this fight, but now he was just looking sadly at the shadow approaching him. Shadow was amused by what had happened. He broke into a run. This time nothing could save his attack. Oasis froze in fear. He didn't know what else he could do, so he just watched as his next death approached him. The warrior accelerated even more, and then made a swing. The force of this swing was destructive, and it seemed that the place he hit literally exploded. Oasis was very scared and closed his eyes, but the blow did not reach him. Because he was still alive, he carefully opened his eyes to understand what had happened. His master appeared before him, but now he was clad in heavy armor, which was able to absorb this incredibly powerful blow. Anchovy thanked the priest for stalling for so long, and then addressed the shadow as a false warrior. He suggested that the shadow hit him, thereby trying to provoke his opponent. It worked. The shadow warrior rushed at the knight with the sole desire to destroy his offender. The Dark Knight didn't stand still. He prepared an attack, while muttering under his breath that now the shadow would be in great pain. Anchovy lunged forward and attacked the shadow with a dark sequential strike. The blow was so powerful that the shadow was simply chopped into various pieces. Such an attack left no chance of survival. What he saw delighted the priest. The enemy, who just now could not even be hit, was now defeated with just one move. Oasis gave a standing ovation, calling Anchovy simply amazing. Such flattery pleased the knight. The warrior was defeated, which meant that they now had to fight the next enemy, who had already appeared before them. The priest noticed a new opponent, so he hastened to draw the master's attention to the new opponent. He explained that now before them appeared the shadow of Kyrie Allison, who was a legendary archmage, the second of the three great warriors, which meant that their goal at the moment was to destroy the shadows of all three legendary warriors. The shadow of the magician did not waste time. She immediately began to read the spell, which summoned a giant fireball right above her head. This attack will most likely destroy the Dark Knight, because even if he reflects the first ball with the shadow shield, many more will immediately follow, leaving him no chance. The knight turned to the boy, put his hands on his shoulders, and said that for such a case he had a secret weapon. Oasis became curious. The boy remarked that his master always had some way out, to which Anchovy merely apologized to the boy. The priest did not understand what the knight meant, but the next moment he lost the solid ground under his feet. The guy raised his subordinate and shouted that he was using the secret friend's shield, but Oasis still didn't understand what was happening. Before the boy could even comprehend what was happening, a fireball flew at him and scorched his back, causing him to scream angrily from the suddenness of it. The shadow believed that the fight was already over, and the challenger was burned in its flames. To her regret, the knight calmly emerged from the flames without any damage, and the mage was extremely stunned by this. Before she could do anything, Anchovy lunged at her, preparing for a series of powerful attacks. He caught up with his target, and in one move chopped it into separate pieces just like his first opponent. This fight was over. As soon as it was all over, the knight approached his comrade and thanked him for this incredible sacrifice. But the boy simply asked to be resurrected quickly without formalities. Realizing that this could hurt the boy, he resurrected him and asked if he was offended. But Oasis said that he was already used to it, and all he needed was a little time to regain his strength. Anchovy didn't answer Oasis. His last opponent appeared before him, and the priest asked if everything was all right. The knight was not at all happy to see this opponent. He did not answer Oasis, but only muttered through his teeth that the most difficult part of the test was beginning. The last shadow appeared before them. It was Archbishop Eden's chronicide. The shadow slowly approached them. The AI asked the owner what class their opponent was, and the knight only meekly replied that he was a priest. Oasis was delighted to hear this. Since he was a priest like himself, he had very little combat skill, which meant the fight promised to be quick. Anchovy hastened to upset the boy, saying that in front of them was a war priest and that among the three he was the strongest. The boy was surprised and asked how strong the battle priests were, but the knight explained that their attack skills were not very high. The next moment, the archbishop threw off his robe, revealing the heavy armor on his body. The boy continued to explain about the archbishop's class, adding that they were very nasty. The boy did not understand what his master had said. The knight didn't bother explaining to his subordinate what he meant. Instead, he rushed at the enemy and demanded that Oasis apply buffs to him. The priest obeyed and began to apply buffs to Anchovy, although he did not understand what kind of battle awaited them. The knight used the Dark Hand Claw skill on the archbishop. The attack hit its target because the shadow was very slow. The enemy stood stunned, while Anchovy was already preparing to attack him from behind. His series of blows also reached their target. The shadow was unable to move anywhere due to the stun, and the blindness aggravated this negative effect. The blow was very powerful, but it only took a quarter of the archbishop's health, which Anchovy did not like at all. Once the negative effects dissipated, the shadow grabbed the handle of the hammer behind its back. The archbishop raised a hammer from behind his back, which the next moment struck the ceiling with lightning bolts. Lightning rolled across the room. One of the charges flew towards the knight, after which a hammer appeared above him. Lightning also flashed over the oasis, and a hammer appeared, which did not bode well. The next moment, hammers fell on their heads, stunning the boys and immobilizing them. Oasis was frightened because he couldn't move, so the knight immediately explained that it was because of the stunning effect. While they stood motionless, the archbishop used his healing hand on himself, restoring all of his health at the cost of a small amount of his mana. After this whole picture, Anchovy turned to his henchman and asked if he understood what was meant by the enemy. The boy answered in the affirmative. Their opponent was indeed very unpleasant. The point of this class was to invest everything into health, find the best defensive equipment, and also learn skills for healing and stunning the enemy. This is exactly what was needed to create the most annoying enemy, one that could not kill, but also could not be defeated. The boy was very surprised and asked how they could defeat an enemy who was constantly regenerating his health. The knight explained that since their opponent was an NPC, he couldn't regenerate his mana, meaning they just had to wait until it ran out. Oasis didn't feel much better about what he heard, so he asked how long all this could have taken them. By this point, the stun had ended, so the knight rushed at the enemy again, telling his comrade that they would learn from their own experience how much time they needed. Hours later, as the battle continued, the archbishop once again stunned the duo to restore his health. The Dark Knight was incredibly infuriated by this, because for the fourth hour in a row he had been hit on the head with a hammer, which made it all seem like a crazy dream. Oasis broke his master from his prison of madness, informing him that their enemy could no longer regenerate his health. And indeed, when trying to use the healing hands again, the shadow's health did not change at all. The boy was delighted with this news, but instead of attacking his defenseless opponent, he replaced his thorn sword with some kind of flimsy club. Oasis noticed this and asked his master where he had put his weapon and why he had armed himself with this trash. The knight explained that if he struck with a sword, the shadow would die very quickly, but he wanted to show his opponent how disgusting it was to be hit on the head many times in a row, thereby avenging long hours of personal suffering. Shadow was also surprised by the choice of weapons, but did not understand what awaited her in the next few minutes. Anchovy flew up to his opponent and, screaming angrily, swung his club over the archbishop's head. He began to hit his opponent exclusively on the head. The boy watched this picture. He even felt a little sorry for the helpless shadow. The task was completed. Anchovy proudly walked away from the archbishop's corpse, satisfied that he would finally raise his class, and Oasis begged for the soul of the poor shadow until its next regeneration. The array of opponents in this trial greatly surprised Oasis. Looking at the dead shadow, he was surprised at how strange they all were. He asked that if such strange NPCs were used for testing, what were the real players like? Through the interface, Anchovy hid his interface and reported that the real players in the competitions were even stranger, and their playing styles were more like some kind of perversion. Recalling the competition, he said that increasingly unusual players appeared each time, making it very interesting to watch, and the international community even considered it a full-fledged esport. Seeing the warmth with which the owner spoke about his memories, Oasis began to doubt whether he really wanted to destroy this game. They rushed towards the exit, but thoughts troubled the priest's head. He was not sure whether Anchovy would be happy when they reached their goal. When they got up, Terry met them again. He was very glad to see them and said that he never doubted for a moment that they would cope with everything. The Dark Curator explained that from that moment on, the guy becomes a Dark Commander, and it is he who now leads the army of the Dark Order. From that moment on, Anchovy's class was upgraded, and he was given access to the Dark Order's stronghold, as well as the opportunity to develop it in the Army of Darkness. Now the boy was the leader of the Army of Darkness in the underground city, so now he could fully devote himself to serving their dark god Crow. The knight remembered that with the acquisition of a new class, the ban that the goddess had placed on him was lifted, and Oasis became curious about what kind of dark base was in the underground city. The knight was pleased by his assistant's curiosity, but he did not tell him anything. Instead, he promised that the boy would see everything for himself. Having finished telling about the new opportunities and responsibilities, Terry blessed the new lord with darkness and sent him to convey the news of the return of the Dark Order throughout the continent. In the underground city, a familiar dark silhouette stood in an alley and waited for something. His name was called. It was none other than the guy's old acquaintance Dean, and he didn't like the fact that someone called him by his real name. Anchovy waved to the bald-robed messenger and said that they hadn't seen each other for a long time, while Oasis just smiled awkwardly. The man in the robe was very scared, but he did not run away and greeted his new commander. Apparently, he still remembered what Anchovy did to him. The knight didn't pay much attention to this and only asked his new minion where the base of the Dark Order was located. The fear on the messenger's face was replaced by a proud smile. He informed the boys that they had come to the right place and he would take them there. The man led them closer to the outskirts of the city, and as soon as they arrived, the only thing in front of them was a rustic, knocked-together outhouse. Anchovy didn't remember the entrance being in such a place, but Dean, in turn, calmly walked toward the small building. Without the slightest hesitation, he approached the booth, grabbed the handle, and abruptly opened the door. He didn't pay attention to what was behind the door and only politely gestured for the guys to enter. But inside there was a bearded man who was calmly relieving himself until he was so rudely interrupted. The priest felt very awkward from what he saw. The village man ran out of the toilet, shouting at those who had disturbed him that even dogs were not to be touched when they were doing their business. Even Anchovy felt uneasy at such a sight. The entrance to the base was in this place because Anchovy himself, during development, let the system choose the location randomly. But even so, of all the places, the system for some reason chose this one. The boys looked awkwardly at the toilet, in which a new dark portal was about to appear. They had no desire at all to go inside. The portal did indeed appear, but to their regret it formed exactly where they least wanted it. Dean, seeing that the portal had opened, joyfully called the guys to quickly go inside. Anchovy cursed loudly about everything that was happening, and Oasis began to complain that everything that was happening was making him feel sick. Already somewhere else, the guys began to materialize in the air. Overcoming the urge to vomit, they nevertheless passed through the portal. As soon as they appeared, they immediately began to cough, and Anchovy continued to swear in his usual manner. Oasis, realizing that they had already left that disgusting place, opened his eyes and saw where they were going. He wanted to clarify if this was what he thought, but the knight beat him to it, saying that they had arrived at the military base of the Dark Order. Before them appeared the gates and tower of what had once been the stronghold of the Dark Order, but now everything here was destroyed, and in the near future they would have to restore the former grandeur of this place.